Representative Dave Murphy. How are you, sir?
Very good, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor whenever you're comfortable.
Thank you. And I think we are on already. Good. Good afternoon, Chairman Swearingen and members of the committee, and thank you so much for allowing me to come before you today and speak on Assembly Bill 393 regarding Kratom. You know, if somebody would have told me 3 years ago that somehow I would be the front line of the fight for Kratom in Wisconsin, I would have never believed you, because I didn't know anything about Kratom, never even heard of it. But someone came to me, somebody that I know, somebody I trusted, and somebody that's a friend, and asked me to bring a bill on Kratom, and so I did it. But shortly after that, after bringing the initial bill, I found out that Kratom was legal in 45 states around the country, and that included being legal in all the states around Wisconsin. And living not terribly far from Menominee, Michigan, I drove up there and I bought some Kratom. I thought, well, I'm going to see what this stuff is, and I'm going to try it. And for some of you that don't know, some years back, I had a bad fall on the ice and hurt my back. And so I've been dealing with back pain for a long time. And you know, one of the things that Kratom was being touted for was pain relief. And so I thought, well, I'll try this stuff. And by golly, I tried some Kratom and found it to be maybe the best pain reliever I had ever come across. Now, why this is important is, in dealing with this back pain, I'd taken quite a lot of ibuprofen. And I went to the doctor for my routine physical, had a blood test done, and the doctor tells me that my kidney function is declining and in a bad zone. Well, this was pretty disturbing to me, and I asked the doctor, well, what could be causing this? We went through what I was taking, and he said, well, when I told him I was taking a pretty good amount of ibuprofen, he said, well, the problem is the ibuprofen. Okay, so what else can I do? Well, he said, a combination of aspirin and Tylenol is something some people take, and you could do that. Well, I started doing that. Before long, again, going back to the doctor, yeah, you have some stomach bleeding issues. I said, well, is this from the aspirin and Tylenol? Yeah, probably. Well, one thing became very clear to me, and that is, no matter what you do to try to control pain, there are always going to be some side effects. And so it really made me think about how well the Kratom had worked, and the fact that I was starting to understand what people that have pain and have to manage it are dealing with. And so I believe that Kratom is something that could be used to manage pain. People that have opioid problems, where does it start? Just about every single person that has an opioid addiction or problem, it begins with the pain and then the use of the opioid to try to control it. I believe that Kratom is a better product for that situation because it's not a depressant. It doesn't make your heart stop if you take too much of it. So we're going to have some people here talking about Kratom, and we have a gentleman that's from Johns Hopkins. We have a gentleman that runs a drug abuse clinic that will talk about it. And really what we're trying to do here is to regulate Kratom so that it can be taken safely in Wisconsin. And the regulation will put Kratom in the same category as like a food product, so that it is being, it will be overseen by DADCAP, and they will decide whether the product, it has to be licensed here in Wisconsin, so that we know it's safe and that it's not adulterated. In some of the research I've done online, they will talk about people dying that had taken Kratom. And I'm very careful how we word that. People that had taken Kratom and died. Didn't say they died from taking Kratom. It says they died because they took Kratom. And in one really extreme situation, when I looked into it, there's a person who had taken Kratom that died from a gunshot. Now I thought, well, did they put this under Kratom because somebody's killed by gunshot? I mean, did they think that Kratom caused them to commit suicide? Well, no, because the gunshot didn't come from the individual themselves. They're shot by somebody else. I'm pretty sure Kratom doesn't make you more likely to be shot by someone else. So, but anyway, this is what we're trying to do. I think this product really has some great potential, and I'm hoping you'll give it the consideration it deserves. So with that, I would love to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. I recall this hearing from last session, and I remember it being one of the most interesting bills that we had heard in the committee, or at least in my opinion anyway.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you bringing it back again this year. As I recall, when they talk about somebody dying of Kratom, it was because it was typically mixed with another substance?
Yes, there was one situation where there were 9 deaths, and every single one of them was adulterated with the same drug coming from the same place. So, I mean, this is sort of like anything, nowadays, fentanyl is a big problem. And small amounts can kill people. It's being, can be put in almost anywhere. So any product can be adulterated. One of the things that we try to do is we try to manage, for instance, our food supply. We go into the grocery store, we know those products have gone through the food safety system. We're looking for Kratom to really go through very much the same type of thing so that we can feel confident that we have unadulterated products.
Okay. Any questions for Representative Brady? Representative Balde? Oh, that's okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony.
Sure.
So my first question is, it may be personal, but you talked about your doctor and all that kind of stuff. What was he able to prescribe for you after all these drugs were causing problem? Was he able to prescribe this particular drug for you or anything else that would make sure that your liver functions were not?
Thank you for that question, because it allows me to clarify that just a bit more. He didn't recommend anything else at that point. At that point, there was really nothing that he recommended. Now, fortunately, I have been to the physical therapist, and I use a chiropractor, and I also do a regimen of strength training and stretching exercises, and it's helped me manage the pain to a great extent without anything. And obviously that's what I would recommend as the best thing for anyone. But I do understand that there are times, and I have that problem myself. Every once in a while, there's a day in which, oh man, this thing hurts, and I just wish there was a way that I could relieve it. And I found in those cases that Kratom was very helpful to me.
So you also reference other states where, people can use this Kratom as a painkiller, whatever that it does. Is there any clinical trials that speaks to the substance of this, that it, in fact...
Sure, and I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to hold off on that because we have a gentleman coming in from Johns Hopkins
Okay.
that can speak a lot more to the trials. I mean, you might as well get it from the best person rather than from me. But yeah, there are trials out there, and so he'll speak to that.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. The only one question, sir, before I let you go. Did your doctor ever made reference to marijuana when you had this conversation with him?
Well, let me explain to you and the difference that I think exists between Kratom and marijuana. When I took Kratom, I could sit down at my desk and I was ready to work. I had no problem whatsoever. There was no intoxicating effect from it, and yet my pain was better. With marijuana, you know, I don't think that that's where I would be. I think if I smoked marijuana, I wouldn't be able to sit down at my desk and be ready to work. And that's the problem that I have in between those two things. I just see Kratom as a far superior painkiller, and also, you know, it plays to the productivity. I think nowadays we have a big problem in our society with workers being productive. And, you know, if we're always taking things and they have an intoxicating nature to them, we're not going to be as productive as we should be. So,
Thank you, Chair.
Representative Onstead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I, too, remember the public hearing from a couple of years ago. It was one of the longer public hearings, and I have to say, it was one of the few that I can actually remember that I changed my position as a result of the testimony in the public hearing. And since that time, I've also talked to good friends of mine who have an addicted son, who was in the throes of addiction for a couple decades, really, and he was able to overcome his addiction to opioids with the use of Kratom. So that certainly weighed on my decision as well. But I do have to mention that, you know, Kratom, and certainly Representative Balde brought it up, but, you know, we're surrounded by states that not only Kratom is legal, we're also surrounded by states where marijuana is legal, which, you know, I think that, you know, depending upon the person and depending upon the, you know, marijuana, that really impacts people's ability to overcome pain, overcome, you know, a lot of different situations, and so it's really more of an individual thing. And I'm sure that there are institutes that could testify in terms of the positive nature of marijuana in a lot of circumstances as well. But I look forward to the testimony today, and just like I did in the last committee meeting or last executive meeting on Kratom, I fully expect to be voting yes. Thank you.
thank you, Representative Onstead. I appreciate that.
Any other questions for Representative Murphy? Seeing none, thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Before I start, I just want to kind of let the group here know that this room, we're kind of under time constraints for this room for the next couple hours, so I'm going to try to get everybody's testimony in, and it's not my intention to cut anybody short, but we have a couple of people that want to testify. They're going to take a little bit of time, and then at some point, we'll put a five-minute limit on testimony as we get further into the afternoon here, but my plan is, or unfortunately, this room is going to be occupied again before 4 o'clock. So, with that, I will call up Dr. Josh Henningford. Did I get that right? Is that what it is? And is there anybody else with you that wants to come up? That's fine too. And you're from Baltimore, Maryland.
He is.
He is. Who else have we got here?
My name is Matt Caddo. I'm the Senior Fellow in Public Policy
Gotcha.
with the American Kratom Association.
Okay.
I'm from outside of D.C., not in D.C.
All right.
I want to clarify that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity for us to discuss this important issue. when I told my wife that I was coming to your beautiful city, the capital city in Wisconsin, she said, "What are you going to do there?" And I said, "Well, I'm coming to inform the committee that they made a mistake in 2014 when they scheduled Kratom." And she kindly but firmly said, "Honey, don't tell them they made a mistake. That will offend them." And I said, "But honey, you tell me I make a mistake daily." And she said, "Well, that's different." I said, "How?" And she said, "After 46 years of marriage, if I have to tell you that, you don't understand." So the purpose I'm here is to ask that you consider adjusting a policy that was made in 2014 at the request of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, who was at the time wrong and remains wrong on the policy on Kratom. The fact is that when Wisconsin passed the scheduling of Kratom in 2014, they did so at the behest of the FDA, who promised that there would be a scheduling procedure that would be adopted by the Drug Enforcement Administration, where nationally Kratom would have been scheduled under the Controlled Substances Act. That did not happen. But in the interim period, the FDA did convince 6 states, along with Wisconsin, one of them, to schedule Kratom. Since then, the state of Vermont has rescinded their ban, recognizing the mistake that the FDA made. The state of Indiana, Rhode Island, and Arkansas have legislation as similar to what's here today that will rescind those bans as well. So we're unwinding the information that was provided by the FDA that turned out to be inaccurate. When the FDA submitted their recommendation for scheduling on Kratom, they did so in 2016 and 2018 under what's called the 8-factor analysis. That's the critical analysis and scientific evaluation of the safety profile and addiction profile of any substance. And with respect to Kratom, they were making the claims that it met those criteria. Now, interestingly, Wisconsin has the very same 8-factor criteria for scheduling here in the state of Wisconsin. The DEA in 2016 rejected the FDA's recommendation and asked for more information. That information was submitted in a second application to the DEA that was withdrawn officially by the Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Giroir, who said to the FDA that they had not met the burden. They couldn't prove the science. In fact, he characterized it in public as embarrassingly poor evidence and data that presented a potential harm to the public health. And that's today the reason we're here, because all of the evidence and data that the FDA did use in order to justify and convince states to ban Kratom is insufficient. They made a third attempt in 2021 to go to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs and ask for international scheduling using that same embarrassingly poor evidence and data. The international standard is lower for scheduling, not as rigorous as ours under the Controlled Substances Act, but they did so knowing that the U.S. is a treaty partner, and if the UN Commission did schedule Kratom, we would be required to commence scheduling procedures here in the United States. Thankfully, the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, which is comprised of 12 independent global experts on substance abuse and addiction liability, unanimously agreed that the FDA had failed to meet their burden to justify international scheduling despite it being a lower standard. So today, this bill that you have before you will correct that error that was made, and we're grateful for the fact that the Wisconsin Controlled Substances Board, which reviewed the scheduling procedure and concluded by resolution that it did not meet the criteria, and that is the public record that's before you today. They did express in a separate resolution concern about deregulating, descheduling it and not having regulations, but that is resolved by this Kratom Consumer Protection Act by putting in requirements that say you cannot adulterate a Kratom product. In the 45 states where it is legal today, it is the Wild West. And we're working with 11 states now who have passed legislation that is similar to what you have today. Those states have passed it, and they're protecting consumers. And that's what we ask for, because we are a consumer advocacy organization. We do not represent the vendors of Kratom. We have reported vendors of Kratom to the FDA to get them to stop marketing products that are either illegally marketing them using therapeutic claims that are not justified or that are adulterating their products. And we think that a regulation here that you have before you corrects that situation and protects Wisconsinites as they go forward. The National Institute on Drug Abuse has concluded that Kratom is a valuable harm reduction tool for people that are struggling with opioids. It's not the only reason people use Kratom. About a third of the 15 million Americans that use Kratom today use it as like a replacement for a cup of coffee. Energy boost, increased focus. A little higher dose, people are managing symptoms of anxiety and depression. And at higher doses, it is doing what we described, helping people get off of opioid addictions. Johns Hopkins University did a study a couple of years ago of adult Kratom consumers using it for the purpose of weaning off of opioids, and they reported that 87% of those individuals had a reduction in their withdrawal symptoms, which is the hardest part of getting off an opioid addiction. 35% replaced opioids with Kratom within a year. Those are the reasons why Dr. Nora Volkow, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, today testifies regularly before the Congress that Kratom can be a valuable harm reduction tool and should be accessible to the American public, despite the FDA's attempts to ban it. She disagrees with the FDA, as did HHS, as did the National Drug Control Policy Office. The FDA is the lone wolf on this because they do not like natural, botanical, or dietary supplements. They want them to be new drugs, and that requires them to go through the NDA process, 10 years, and millions of dollars of investments. And in this case, they're depriving the Americans of valuable resources. We know that the deaths and adverse events that have been reported are because of adulterated products are added or poorly formulated products. That's corrected by this legislation. We are pleased that the American Medical Association clarified their position on Kratom at their House of Delegates meetings in Chicago this past June, where they passed a resolution that says that science should drive the policy on Kratom, not the opinions of the FDA or anyone else. Science dictates the safety of Kratom based on that 8-factor analysis. They say that patients that are struggling with pain issues should have access to physicians to discuss those things, and the policy there ought to be that they have those access and, of course, access to all other products that can help them. And they said that no criminal charges should be made against a person that's using Kratom. That's the position of the American Medical Association, and we agree. It may not be the position of the Wisconsin Medical Association, as you've seen from their letters. And then it said, the AMA resolution said, if there are therapeutic claims made with respect to Kratom, they should be backed up by clinical trials. We completely agree. We have reported more than 80 Kratom vendors over the last 3 years to the Food and Drug Administration that are making those very illegal therapeutic claims. In those 3 years, not a single prosecution. The FDA is not serious about protecting consumers. Unfortunately, what they're doing is trying to prosecute their claim that Kratom should be scheduled, and they simply can't meet that scientific burden. You will hear about reports of deaths and adverse events with respect to Kratom. Every death is tragic. But the Department of Health and Human Services, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and even the FDA acknowledge that those deaths are associated with polydrug use and underlying health conditions. There's not a single documented case, despite what you read in the press, of a Kratom death alone. We want to find the truth, but it ought to be based on science, not the opinions, and not by an FDA that misleads medical examiners around the country that deprive families of the truth. We think good evidence and data should be used, accurate testing about Kratom and blood tox screens and forensic toxicology on any death, and we have examined hundreds of those deaths that have been attributed by various sources to Kratom and found all are polydrug use or underlying health conditions that have led to those things. We want to protect the American public, and what we have today is a rampant marketplace with adulterated Kratom products that is controlled by one thing, good regulations. We know that caffeine is the most widely used drug in the world, and the FDA finally had to step in and ban concentrated caffeine products that were dangerous. We want the FDA to do the same thing here. Respect the marketplace of safe Kratom products and only look at banning those substances that are synthetically derived, which this bill would eliminate, that are adulterated with dangerous substances, which this bill would eliminate, and we encourage the Wisconsin legislature to join those states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and protect consumers. Thank you.
I'm Jack Henningfield. By disclosure and experience, I'm Vice President of Research, Health Policy, and Abuse Liability at Pinney Associates, and I do 8-factor analyses for professionally, several per year. I'm a Johns Hopkins adjunct professor since 1978 and have been involved in addiction research and medicines development for now 52 years. Before Penny Associates, I was at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I headed the section that was created in 1985 to assist FDA and DEA on drug scheduling. And in February of this year, I submitted a letter to the Controlled Substances Board of Wisconsin clarifying some of their questions about how 8-factor scheduling works. That is co-authored by three other former federal officials involved in drug scheduling from DEA and FDA. And I leave that with you in case you have questions about the process. The last hearing, by the way, was really interesting and relevant. I mean, to me, it was in part about oversight and guardrails to enable vendors, give them guidance, and protect consumers. That's what we need here. And FDA will come around. I work with FDA. They're the best organization in the world to do this when they put their mind to it. Hopefully more states setting standards will bring FDA along. Let me just make a couple of simple points. Kratom does not meet the legal, scientific, or public health standard for drug scheduling. And that was determined by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, my former institute. And it's rare that DEA and NIDA and NIH line up against FDA. I'm saying it's rare. It basically hasn't happened. And why did it happen? It happened because NIDA follows the science and both follow the public health, and both were concerned that taking away kratom would lead people to go back to opioids. And that was the basis, part of the basis for the Secretary of Health to rescind FDA's order. So what do I mean by legal, scientific, and public health? The legal standards is it botanically in the class of a substance that's already scheduled? And the answer is no. Kratom is in the coffee family. That's part of the reason people use it to enhance their work occupational performance, not detract from it. It's not a chemically related to a controlled substance. And it's not botanically related, chemically related, and the overall science does not indicate that it fits the scientific definitions of addictive drugs that we use as the standards, like opioids, like cocaine, like certain sedatives, and so forth. The 8-factor analysis brings that all together. It forces you to look at all of the science. And the public health standard, well, that's the basis for, you've heard of emergency scheduling by DEA or temporary scheduling. That's when something is a known or imminent public health risk. And then that can be scheduled. That's 4 factors that's 3 factors in the 8-factor analysis. FDA had ignored that. And DEA in its initial ruling just listened to FDA and didn't do that analysis. And when they realized that people could die if they banned it, they withdrew their scheduling proposal. So what we need, in my opinion, is regulated kratom, as this bill will provide, so that consumers don't have to go to my home state of Minnesota to get their kratom, or other states, and know that it has the same safeguards as drinking water, as dog food, and other things, some regulatory oversight. If you have any other questions about the science, if the science is there, I can get it. I have done some of the studies myself and in collaboration with colleagues at Hopkins and globally. Thank you for your hearing.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen. Representative Spiros, you had a question?
Question. Yeah, thank you both for coming. So I looked up kratom and as far as being safe or unsafe, and the first thing I find is the Mayo Clinic indicates that it's unsafe on their research. And when you look at who's voted, who basically is in favor of this, it's the American Kratom Association. Everybody else has a thumb down, law enforcement and medical societies here in Wisconsin. And when you take a look here, it says that kratom has been classified as possibly unsafe when taken orally. Kratom has a number of known side effects, including weight loss, which maybe I should be taking that. Dry mouth, chills, nausea, vomiting, and it goes on, and it also affects the mind and nervous system. Dizziness, drowsiness, hallucinations, delusion, depression, delusion, breathing suppression, seizures, coma, and death. And this is from, again, the Mayo Clinic. You can go online, and I just asked the question, is Kratom safe? And that's what came up, was this from the Mayo Clinic, and the Mayo Clinic's not that far. I mean, my wife's a nurse, and her views and my views might differ a little bit when it comes down to medication and drugs and things like that. But the issue with this is, why does Johns Hopkins feel one way, the Mayo Clinic feels another way, and then all the medical societies here in Wisconsin have thumbs down? I understand from law enforcement where they're at, but in the private sector, I'm responsible for truck drivers. I'm responsible for the safety and the claims for those individuals. I've already seen what CBD did from the standpoint that I actually voted for that because I saw an opportunity to protect, to help kids that had seizure disorders. And that's really where it came from initially here in this state, and thought that was a good idea, but it's really branched out a lot further. And today, even some of the product with THC is not at the low level, it's at a higher level, which could be, which basically can cause some problems, especially if you're driving. And this one here, when I read about some of the things that this can cause, my fear is that even though it's illegal in other states, and here it's not, still you have somebody who takes something like this and then going down the road or whatever else, they're unsafe, they have a crash or whatever else, finds out that they had that in their system. But just to make sure, and I will commend the bill and the author and you guys for at least looking at it from the standpoint of how can we at least regulate it? And so from that standpoint, I commend you. It's just on the sides here, I'm looking at the research from your research versus other medical societies, and it doesn't sound like everybody's on the same page.
So if I could respond then, but defer to Dr. Henningfield. The Mayo Clinic has not done a single shred of evidence research themselves. They've repeated what the FDA says, and you can verify that with them. We have. There was a philanthropist who went to the Mayo Clinic and offered to give them a blank check to do Kratom research that was objective, and they declined, saying that they're deferring to the FDA. So you're seeing, and that's true, an ecosystem of research organizations that work with the FDA. And as Dr. Henningfield said, we want to trust the FDA, and most of the time we can. I can tell you that when I served in the Reagan administration, Department of Health and Human Services, as chief of staff, we had to tell the FDA they were wrong about dietary supplements, and that ended up with a legislative fix, which is coming for Kratom, by the way. There will be a federal bill filed with Representative Pocan on the House side and Representative Bergman from Michigan, two diametrically opposed political groups or ideologies, and Senator Mike Lee of Utah and Senator Cory Booker filing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which will rein in the FDA and force them to actually account for the current state of the science. So on that score, I hope you'll consider that when you Google it, you're going to find that. But if you use Google Science, you will find hundreds of peer-reviewed published articles that support the Kratom safety and addiction liability profile that will support this legislation. And with respect to law enforcement and the medical societies, I quoted the AMA. The American Medical Association was under intense pressure to do what the Wisconsin Medical Association and, for example, the Mississippi Medical Association wanted them to do, and they rejected it because they looked at it closely. These are doctors who analyzed it, and you can look at their resolution. It does not support the criminalization or scheduling of Kratom, and in fact set standards which we completely agree with on that score. Lastly, I would ask you to consider two things. NIDA has done intoxication studies of metrogeny, Kratom. That's the principal alkaloid, metrogeny, and they see no impairment on driving. So when you hear the informed discussion about what its impacts are, Kratom at normal dosages and responsible use alerts people. It will alert your truck drivers. I mean, it's a better substance than what they might be taking that would create impairments, and there's studies that show that. And then I would ask you to listen to the people of Wisconsin who will testify here today that will tell you that Kratom has changed their lives, that it's improved the quality of their life. And I've been at dozens and dozens of hearings around the country where people have said it saved my life. And I think you need to listen to those people. I'll defer to Dr. Indy.
Just very little to add to that. As a Minnesotan, a Mayo Clinic is revered. Hold the Mayo in this case, they got it wrong. And I met with the controlled substance staff people in Minnesota, and they fortunately rejected Mayo Clinic's advice. They said, look, we've got serious problems. Kratom is not one of them, and we don't want to create a problem. And what do I mean by create a problem? Banning it and then having people having to go even further to get their kratom, or going back to serious opioids. Most medical organizations follow the FDA advice, and Mr. Shinholm, who's here today, will, with drug treatment clinics, it's the same with many drug treatment clinics who will only prescribe buprenorphine and other drugs that are FDA approved. I helped develop buprenorphine. I'm proud of that. It saves lives, but it's not for everybody.
Representative Hong.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Can you reiterate, can you repeat for us how many states have banned the use of Kratom? I know that we're one of 4 or 5.
6.
6.
6, and 1, Vermont has already rescinded it. They're in the process of doing their rulemaking to remove it from their controlled substances list.
And how many states currently regulate the use of Kratom?
11.
11. Were you involved in the process for, the policymaking process there as well?
On behalf of consumers, which we represent, we have advocated for the framework of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in all of those states, and it's currently active in 6 more states this year, including Wisconsin, and we expect that there'll be hearings in probably 30 states next year. And our whole goal is to get the FDA to do what they should be doing, which is properly regulating it from a federal level.
In those other states, have you had conversations with law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay, I want to just, we have the folks here who have registered against or for, and the folks who have registered against include the Badger State Sheriff's Association, the Wisconsin Academy of Family Physicians, Wisconsin Chiefs of Police Association, the Wisconsin Medical Society, and the Wisconsin Sheriff's and Deputy Sheriff's Association. My final question is, in your work, and you've been doing this for quite some time now, our law enforcement officers, we here in this building, this very beautiful building, in policymaking, often are somewhat removed from just the realities of what it's like on the ground. And I think my concern right now is we have folks who are representing experiences where, they're seeing, it does give me pause that every single one of these associations has registered against. So I'm wondering, can you describe a little bit more what your experience has been, or have there been partnerships with law enforcement, at a local level that you maybe have encouraged folks to do, or where, some of that, or if you can, basically, can you outline for us what the potential partnership with law enforcement has looked like in your lobbying efforts?
I can, thank you. With respect to medical societies, there are a couple of states where the medical societies have raised their strong objections, which in fact led to the review by the American Medical Association on a resolution proposed then, and I suspect supported by the Wisconsin Medical Society, where that was changed by the American Medical Association House of Delegates to what I described. It does not support what the Wisconsin Medical Association's objection to this legislation is. And in fact, we embrace it and we support it. With respect to law enforcement, I have to tell you, this is unique in Wisconsin, because when this issue has been raised with law enforcement agencies across the country, there are 2 responses we get. One is, we don't know what it is, and we hear that consistently. And when they are asked to look at the number of incidents that are Kratom related, and we did this, a national survey which included Wisconsin, and I think this is an important question to ask, how many actual incidents on crime reports or OWIs or DUIs are you seeing with Kratom involved? And consistently across the country, law enforcement agencies have reported that unless it's associated with another substance, you don't see Kratom exclusive crimes or DWIs or anything like that. So we find it surprising that the Wisconsin group is so adamantly opposed. I suspect that they're acting on, in good faith, on information they're receiving from the FDA. We did have a Nevada law enforcement officer who reported that he had been on a webinar call with the FDA where they had recommended that all law enforcement agencies oppose this. You'll hear from Senator Bramble from the state of Utah talk about this, where in Utah, the first state to pass the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and what law enforcement's experience had been. I think they're vastly different. We should not base our opposition to Kratom on opinions or biases. We should look at data, and you have to find out in Wisconsin, and we, in the hearing with the Controlled Substances Board, heard clearly that there's not a significant problem with Kratom only in any law enforcement issue in the state of Wisconsin. I can't account for why, that they're opposing it on that basis, but that's at least the factual basis that was presented to your Controlled Substances Board, and we see consistently across the country.
Representative Balde.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I see that one of you is from DC, the other is around the DC area. So I'm sure a lot of politics from DC may be coming here. But anyway, my question is, first of all, I want to just be clear. Are you a representative or an advocate for Kratom or no? You're just a consumer advocacy agency, or what relationship do you have with Kratom?
So my hat is that I represent the American Kratom Association, a consumer-based organization advocating for the 15 million and growing number of Americans using Kratom. I also am here as a Kratom consumer. I use Kratom, have been for the last 6 years regularly. I'm an old guy, and it helps me with arthritis and pain and that associated with it. And I also injured my knee a couple of months ago, so I've increased the amount of Kratom. I'm not going to confess that the last time I took some Kratom, because I'm here in Wisconsin, but I'm testifying to you under the influence of Kratom. Now, if anybody thinks that I'm delusional, maybe I am. If anybody thinks that I'm impaired in some way, maybe you have to see me when I'm not, I don't know. But I don't think that people that make claims about Kratom impairing you and somehow, and as Dr. Henningfield said, that when you look at the research, it actually is more alerting. It helps you increase focus, and it takes responsible use. Can you abuse Kratom? Absolutely. You can abuse any substance that you choose. Responsible use, and the key to that is good labeling, good instructions on how people should properly use it, and we advocate for that. We think it's an important part of the experience of using Kratom.
So you also, then that means basically you're being somehow paid by Kratom to do the work that you do. That is true, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm employed by the American Kratom Association.
Excellent. So you also presented yourself as a consumer advocate. What other products do you advocate for outside of Kratom?
Other substances?
Yes.
Well, I've been in this space for about 40 years. I had a brief time. I served in the legislature in Utah, so I'm a recovering politician. I served as the chief of staff, Department of Health and Human Services. I worked for Senator Orrin Hatch when he served, and in my career in the advocacy space, I've worked with dietary supplement groups for at least 35 years, advocating for the right of Americans to have the freedom to make choices about responsible use of dietary supplements, which the FDA doesn't like any more than they like Kratom, but they have to live with it because the federal government implemented the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act in 1994, which, if the FDA had their power, they would repeal that bill today. They hate dietary supplements, but 80% of the Americans use them and report they're having great effects by them, and it's a $100 billion industry. So consumer acceptance of products the FDA doesn't necessarily like isn't the criteria. It's about how it's helping people, and that's why I referred the representative to listen to the Kratom consumers here today, their experiences, why it's helping them, and I think you'll see why I'm so passionate about advocating for them.
May I add something? I helped develop buprenorphine, and I've consulted on that, and I'm proud of it. It saves lives, but it's not for everybody. And one of my colleagues in Johns Hopkins, when she heard what we were doing in the Kratom space, she sent me a very personal note thanking me for the effort. I said, Meg, FDA is wrong on the science and the policy, but this is about millions of people for whom Kratom is a lifeline. Got a note back, Jack, my son is one of those people. I shiver when I say it because he went to school with my son. He almost overdosed with opioids, got into buprenorphine treatment. It stabilized him, but he hated buprenorphine. He couldn't function. He tried Kratom. And she said, we were nervous about it. She's board-certified addiction specialist, professor at Johns Hopkins. And she said, over the next 6 months, he got his life back. And that's what the most common refrain that I hear. And in terms of consumer access, that's vital. I worked on a new form of naloxone or Narcan, and the company jacked up the price, and it wasn't going to help people. So my group formed Harm Reduction Therapeutics to make it truly over-the-counter, non-profit. And it was approved by FDA last July, and it'll start shipping mainly to states to help states save money by getting Narcan much lower and being able to put it in gas stations where people need it. So I'm not a Kratom advocate per se. I'm a scientist. I follow the science, and I serve public health. That's why I'm here.
Just to follow up on the last part, being a scientist, what is your opinion on marijuana?
On marijuana?
And what work have you done around it? Yes.
On marijuana. Boy, that is dicey. My lab did some of the lead studies on cannabis. We did the first studies on brownies. We made the brownies in our kitchen and found that same problem that some people sometimes report with, oh, shoot, I chewed too much and now I'm screwed. I have concerns about unfettered access and legalization. On the other hand, the balance in the other direction is not good. I'm very glad that right now FDA, DEA, and NIH, I think, are working together to come up with better policies. With Kratom, I don't think it should just be
No, so
unregulated.
outside of policies, your scientific, I'm asking for your scientific knowledge and
I'm going to ask the
research.
members to make sure we
terms
stick
of-
to the bill.
Yeah.
We have to stick to this. Bill's not about marijuana.
Yeah.
It's about
In
Kratom.
terms of risks, marijuana carries serious risks in terms of impairing judgment, driving, and other things. We
All
do
right,
not
so
see
let's
that
move
with
on to
Kratom.
some other things that has to do with the bill. So, Matt, you reference hundreds of peer reviews out there. Can you give a few examples of agencies, credible agencies that did these peer reviews?
So the National Institute on Drug Abuse has funded about $30 million of our taxpayer money with contractors to do these studies, and dozens and dozens of those are derivative of the funding by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the peer-reviewed studies. And then there are many of the research organizations that are doing it on their own initiative because of the public policy interest. And so you'll see funding that's done independently, has nothing to do with the industry and nothing to do with consumers, but you'll find these studies are being done by government funding or independent research institutions.
So also, can you give an example of proven clinical trials that says that this treat disorders?
Dr. Hanningfield wants to take that question, if that's all right.
Please.
At this point, the clinical trials in humans are ongoing by National Institute on Drug Abuse funding. Some of them were reported at a meeting Monday at the American College of Clinical Pharmacology by the lead night scientist on a panel that I served on. And she talked about the data using driving simulators, safety data. This is a case where also Johnson Foods has done just completed a major 200-person clinical trial to FDA standards, but in Canada, looking at liver, heart, all kinds of safety parameters, 4 different products, 3 different doses, 15-day exposures, and they believe that, and I believe, looking at the data, this should support acceptance of FDA, of their product as a legal FDA-accepted dietary ingredient. More clinical trials are ongoing. One was with pain, looking at it for analgesic effects, looking at withdrawal. So these are starting to pop up, mostly with NIDA funding, my old institute. NIDA's website, if you want to look at the science, is very careful, conservative, cautious, but they're I think, the best keepers of the science in the area.
And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we can provide a list of the peer-reviewed published articles that are available on this subject, and I think you'll see it's hundreds of articles.
Yeah, very good. One final question. You referenced also the Wisconsin State Controlled Substance Board. What was your conversation with them like, and where do they stand on this?
So following the hearing last year, there was a request made by the legislature for the Controlled Substances Board to answer the question as to whether or not Kratom meets the 8 factors that are a part of the Wisconsin law. And over a period of, I would guess, 9 months, we had many discussions, hearings with the individual constituent groups that comprise the Controlled Substances Board, and the conclusion of that analysis was that it does not meet the criteria. That was, by the way, supported by Concordia University, and I think Dr. Cunningham may be here, I don't know, but he conducted a study and he concluded here in Wisconsin that it doesn't meet the criteria for 8 factors. That's what they concluded. They expressed concerns about just descheduling it and not doing anything else, and we have the same concern. That's why we want this bill.
All right, well, thank you, Chairman.
Representative Snicki?
I'll pass. Representative Valde kind of asked my question.
Okay. Any other questions for our guests here? Representative Gustafson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at the 8-factor, you said that Kratom doesn't fit within this standard, and well, your argument is it doesn't fit in the standard.
Well, with respect, not my argument, that was evaluated by the Drug Enforcement Administration, by the Department of Health and Human Services, and by the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence. It does not, by their standard, not mine.
Gotcha. So from any of the studies that either of you would be able to produce, has there been anything that points to Kratom being habit forming in any way, shape, or form?
Any what?
Any habit forming, is it develop a
Oh,
dependence?
for some people, you can develop, like, as with, I think the best analogy is coffee. So with coffee, most daily coffee users have some level of tolerance, and we call it dependence, not addiction, because it's not impairing activities. You get the same thing with Kratom with people that are daily users. Most of the Kratom consuming population is intermittent. They use it when they have some pain. The people that are daily users mostly are people that are using because of pain or addiction. And my NIDA colleague, she introduced a new technical term yesterday. She said in this population, the use is boring from an addiction perspective. She said, so the people that they've surveyed, and then they've done blood sampling tests to track things, basically the people that have turned to Kratom in place of opioids for pain or addiction, she said they get up in the morning, they have their Kratom tea or Kratom capsules. Some take it in the middle, some later in the evening. She said basically it's not interfering. They get their lives back, unlike for some people buprenorphine. And she said from an addiction perspective, it's boring. She said it's not interfering and impairing life, it's enhancing.
So I think to answer your question, yes, you can develop a dependence. It's a complex area. I think Mr. Shinsholzer can address this as an addiction recovery specialist. You can develop a psychological addiction, which is hard and needs help. In terms of the physical dependence on it, Dr. Henningfield's described that. It's moderate, it's not a difficult problem, and you do not have the same problem weaning off of a Kratom addiction from a physical dependence standpoint. It's like my addiction of choice is Diet Coke. I might, if I quit cold turkey, I might have a week of upset stomach, runny nose, and headache. That's the profile for Kratom as well.
I would like to leave a copy of the letter that me and my former federal colleagues in scheduling did for the Controlled Substances Board, because it also lists 8 or 10 other substances that all can produce dependence, tolerance, but are not scheduled.
And then just want to follow up to, I just want to make sure I heard this correctly. You said 87% of opioid users that have switched to Kratom.
This was in my survey by my colleagues in my department at Hopkins. I did not have input. I independently did a separate study that came up with similar findings. 2 other surveys came up with similar findings. But so they were looking at people that were reporting use for opioid, and they were finding it for opioids, and they were finding it very helpful in reducing withdrawal. And that wasn't surprising. We convened the leading experts from around the world. We had an expert from every lab that had done a human or animal study in a virtual think tank, and it was published a couple of months ago, with the expert opinions of that group. It became the hottest download from the scientific journal.
What kind of
Clarify
time?
if I
what-
could. I'm
And
sorry.
just, I just want to jump on real quick too with the 87, the same kind of findings that you found. What kind of timeline was that study kind of or survey conducted
what-
over? For the opioid dependency being weaned off if they
So
were to?
what we find is that in people, generally, they make the substitution on their own over a period of usually days, weeks, or even months. My colleague at Hopkins, her son, it was a process. It was a gradual process. He couldn't function on buprenorphine. He tried drug-free clinic, and then he was miserable. He started using Kratom, and then he got kicked out of the clinic. So he was on his own, but over a period of months. Usually getting off of addiction is not an event, it is a process. For most people, months, weeks, years, lifetime.
Yeah,
And I'll send you this Johns Hopkins study. What I intended to say, and I hope I didn't misstate it, is that 87% reported a relief from withdrawal symptoms, and so that was what it did. And then subsequently, 35% replaced the opioid they withdrew from with Kratom. Not that they're connected in that sense.
Gotcha, thank you. No, just from everything that I've heard, and thank you for testifying very much, is that the right to try Kratom has a great impact on the opioid crisis our state is facing. And so that's where, if there is an opportunity, and I know other members on this committee have mentioned other substances that they would like to highlight, but I'm in the category of, if this is going to help alleviate that issue in our state right now, I'm all for this.
May I comment on that?
Absolutely.
One of the first questions that me and my colleagues looked at 10 years ago and have been monitoring ever since with every federal survey from NIDA, from SAMHSA, from DEA, the forensic system, the old Dawn, the new Dawn system, you name it, treatment episode data sets. We monitor all of them. Big question was, is Kratom a path to opioids or away from opioids? There is no compelling evidence that Kratom is a path to opioids. Not that it's never happened, but there's lots of compelling published evidence that it is a path away from opioids. And it reaches people for whom buprenorphine, methadone were not acceptable, not accessible, or they just didn't like it or couldn't function. And for those people, Kratom was an alternative that they could do it their own way, on their own, and then they're asking, why would the government take this away from me?
Thank you.
Representative Brooks.
Up on that line of questioning and having gone through the last hearing on this, there seemed to be very little evidence that there's a chemical dependency to Kratom. We can just use the word addiction or reliance or psychological, but is there a chemical dependency? And I don't want to be flippant about it, but people have addictions to everything. I was watching TV the other day, and
Yes.
there's the lady's eating toilet paper. We don't ban toilet paper. The other lady was eating the cushions out of her seat or out of her car. You know, I mean, it's just absurd what people become addicted to, but there's no scientific evidence that I've read that there's a chemical dependency. I would lean towards, it seems to help people that are dependent on drugs get off them. Like you said, there's not a two-way path. It seems to be more of a one-way path.
I'll be really precise in the terminology, consistent with the lecture Monday at the national meeting in Seattle that I was at from NIDA is not an official NIDA statement, but it's by the lead NIDA scientist. And I'm in agreement with what she testified on everything. First, Kratom, chemically, like caffeine, can produce a low-level dependence in the body and some tolerance. And almost everybody that drinks coffee every day or tea or diets, Coke or whatever, has some level of dependence. The question is, does it evolve into what we now call substance use disorder, which is the technical term for addiction, and it used to be dependence. So the DSM-5 calls it substance use disorder. That generally involves impaired life functioning. And so the latest data from NIDA is confirming other data that there are very few people for whom Kratom is life functioning impairing, rather it restores life functioning. In some cases by intermittent use, in some cases by transient use for a few months to get off of opioids and then they get off of Kratom. In other cases by people just making longer-term substitution. And we don't call that a substance use disorder or addiction. We just say that's like a chronic pain patient that's using their opioids properly, that is maintained, but they're functioning.
Can I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, sir? Can you overdose on Kratom without becoming, I guess there's different forms now, but from what I remember from the prior testimony, you would become violently ill if you were to consume that much.
As we sit here, we do, you can never rule out, you can never say never.
Right.
But out of the 107,000 overdose deaths that were documented last year in the United States and about 1,400 in Wisconsin, none that I am aware were confirmed to be exclusively due to Kratom. There were some where people were using Kratom along with other substances in which the other substances were determined to be the primary cause. We don't even know by how Kratom would cause overdose. Every drug that causes overdose has a signature. Opioids, it's respiratory depression. Sedatives, respiratory depression. Alcohol, a lot of times it's aspiration of fluids and everything. Stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine, generally cardiovascular. There is no signature for Kratom. Several studies have looked at extremely high doses of key Kratom alkaloids in animals. Sounds gross, but it's how you test drugs for safety. It turns out that it's extremely difficult to kill animals. And last year, we did a study following the FDA model to the letter. Literally called FDA staff the night before dosing was to start by the independent contracting laboratory. And we promised FDA we would share the results with them before we shared it to the philanthropy that sponsored the study. And we pushed the dose. The goal was the highest possible dose that was physically administratable or which killed the animals, compared to oxycodone following the FDA protocol. Animals died in the oxycodone case. They had respiratory depression. The curve for Kratom was a flat line, meaning no dose, no time did we alter respiratory depression or cause life-threatening effects. That doesn't mean that you can't overdose, but the signal is very low.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging.
Representative Znicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was co-sponsor of this bill last session. I did not sign on this session because, as the speaker said yesterday, sometimes we may make mistakes and we have to own up to them. I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but I've just heard since last session so much about this that is very concerning to me. Now, Representative Brooks asked about overdoses on Kratom. And from what I could tell, some of the reading I've done, there has been documented overdoses on Kratom. In fact, there was just a lawsuit filed earlier this year, I think it was in Florida, against the state, or no, Washington State maybe.
Well, Florida and Washington State, I'd be glad to tell you the circumstances.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the circumstances
Sure.
were, but let me just finish.
Okay.
My other concern is, and I see we do have law enforcement back there, I don't know if you're testifying or not, but there's no actual test to tell if somebody has Kratom in their system. I'm going to ask you guys that, so we're ready.
There is a test.
There is now?
Yes, absolutely. There is a test.
Okay, so you want to tell me about the lawsuit?
Sure, there are two that are primary getting a lot of attention. One is, in the state of Washington, there was a jury award for a failure to notify under product liability statutes in the state of Washington, did not examine whether Kratom was the substance that caused the death of the individual, and in fact, that never came up as a part of the deal, only that the Kratom vendor was using illegal therapeutic claims to sell the product to that individual. Again, this bill clears that up. We oppose that kind of thing. justified award. In the state of Florida, the second one is more troubling, and that is that the product that was ingested by the decedent was called space dust. It was manufactured by a company that made claims in their marketing material that this was super potent and enhanced kratom, which means it wasn't pure kratom. It didn't pass any standard for safety, and the product was sold in a plastic pouch with no labeling, nothing on the back of it. On the front, the vendor had taken a magic marker or a Sharpie and put space dust on it. Now, that product should never have been on the market. The FDA should have blocked it, and they didn't, and they won't. And that's why this state legislation is so important. In the state of Washington, that product should not have been on the market. When they make an illegal therapeutic claim, they should be removed from the marketplace. That's what this bill will do. Any of the deaths that are allegedly associated with kratom, if you look at the Centers for Disease Control report, where they looked at 91 deaths that were claimed by medical examiners to be caused by kratom, were actually just detected kratom in the system. 67% had fentanyl. And then it goes down to cocaine and methadone, all kinds of things are in their system. Only 7 were reported to be kratom only, and so the CDC said, let's see the blood samples. 4 of those 7 had blood samples available. They tested those. They found it was polydrug use using more sophisticated equipment that medical examiners wouldn't have. This issue is confused by medical examiners who are listening to the FDA and not doing the proper analytical work to give the truth to the families that have decedents here. Kratom is not the problem, it's polydrug use.
Can I just add, in that article is widely cited in the media in some studies as showing that 91 deaths were kratom overdoses. They didn't bother to read what CDC actually said. What CDC actually said is what Mr. Haddow just told you, but it's misreported in the media.
And as far as the test, kratom can be tested easily, and it's done by your lab here. Last year, we heard testimony from the law enforcement officers that you can't test for it. That's not true. And your lab tests for kratom because it is a controlled substance. So we think facts should direct this public policy and science, not opinions and whims and misstatements.
One more quick question, if I could, because I'd really like to move on and to hear from actual people that aren't being paid to be here. Where is kratom grown? I mean, how is it grown? Where is it grown? Greenhouses, Southeast Asia? Do we have farms that grow it?
The majority of kratom is sourced today from Southeast Asia. Now Africa's gotten into the marketplace significantly. It is grown in Hawaii, and there are plans to scale up production in Hawaii to commercial grade quantities that will support the American population. It's grown in Florida. Any place you have a tropical environment with water that sustains the growth of the kratom plant, they're finding success with it. There are greenhouses that grow it too. That's a little complex because the trees can grow quite tall, but there is a greenhouse in West Virginia that grows kratom as well.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Representative Brooks.
One more. It was brought up, the Mayo study, I think you put that to rest. I was just reading an article from Harvard, because we keep referring to the FDA as this enlightened entity, yet over the last 10 years, 14,000 drugs that they approved were recalled. So to hold the FDA up as a standard, can you talk to, and I know you mentioned it earlier, but I had dug out for another hearing, the reluctance for the FDA to remove any, claims to this thing, or they're doing the same thing with marijuana, not declassifying even though it's legal in how many states. What is the holdup with the FDA? And can you talk to the percentage of drugs that they have approved and recalled? Like I said, I know the Harvard study said 14,000 in the last 10 years. That's a lot of drugs.
I work with the FDA every day. I've been involved in dozens and dozens of drug approvals, and I'm really proud of that. Most of them serve people. Mistakes are made sometimes in approval. It's always a balancing act. Are as FDA moving too quickly or too slowly? In the area of dietary supplements, FDA opposed DSHEA in 1994. FDA thought everything that was dietary should be an approved drug or not on the market. DSHEA created a pathway for people like my wife who prefer dietary ingredients and natural products and use drugs when she has to. FDA is not comfortable with that. FDA has said, well, the kratom should be developed as a drug. Well, guess what? That's roughly a 10-year, billion-dollar process, and you end up with a refined product that isn't like the original and isn't something my wife would use. Or they say, go the botanical drug route. There have been 800 applications for that. 2 have been approved in 15 years. I've worked on several, and they all failed and bailed out. I don't understand the hang-up. I know that not everybody at FDA is in agreement with that policy.
If I could just add on the FDA, in 2018, when the recommendation by the FDA to the Drug Enforcement Administration to schedule kratom was withdrawn by the Assistant Secretary for Health, the question was whether that would be made public, because we as an advocacy organization didn't know about it. We didn't know about it for 2.5 years. And the reason is the FDA told the Assistant Secretary for Health's office they were invoking the FOIA restriction on ongoing regulatory review. And it took Congressman Mark Pocan with a Republican colleague from Virginia to do a FOIA request, a direct request to HHS to get that letter. A month after that revocation withdrawal actually occurred, then FDA Commissioner Gottlieb was on the public airwaves claiming kratom was an opioid. And he knew that letter, that rescission letter, had decried that, had refuted that. And yet he did it anyway. So the FDA, unfortunately, has not been honest with the American public with respect to kratom. And we think it's time for the sunlight to come in, good regulations, and let's protect American consumers.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to travel to our great state.
Thank you very much.
Can I leave this with somebody?
Yes. Where did, there, right, the sergeant's staffs. And gentlemen, anything you want to get to the committee, go ahead and email it to my office and the clerk will distribute it. Next up, we're going to take Christopher Cunningham, and then I'm going to go to the Wisconsin Medical Association, their society. So I appreciate everybody kind of hanging with us. Mr. Cunningham, how are you?
Yes, thank you, I'm good. Full disclosure, I'm originally born in Washington, D.C., but I saw the light and moved to Wisconsin about 12 years ago.
Welcome home.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Swearingen, and thank you all for your time and listening to me with my testimony here. Just as full disclosure, so I am a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at Concordia University, Wisconsin School of Pharmacy. I am here as a public citizen. I'm here as a scientist. I do no kratom research. I do not have any plans to do any kratom research. I don't have any dogs in this fight. I'm a person who is just interested in science, and I'm interested in natural products-based drug discovery, and I have about 20 years of experience in opioid research. So that's a little bit about my background. You should have in front of you, we actually did conduct an 8-factor analysis. My School of Pharmacy students, as part of a class project last fall in my medicinal natural products course. So what you see in front of you has also been given to the Controlled Substances Board that was mentioned earlier, and so they considered it as well. But basically, some of the talking points here, and you can see all the data. There's a ton of data in here, so I've heard that there are lots of questions about you know, is this addictive, is this habit forming, and that sort of thing. There's a lot of that here, so that's primary peer-reviewed literature that you can look at. You know, I think I'm glad to answer questions that you might have, but some of the things I want to get across is really kind of in a broad point. Paracelsus, one of the godfathers of toxicology, is pretty famous for saying that there's poison in everything, and that the dose determines the remedy versus the poison, which is essentially a kind of philosophical way of saying that anything could cause an overdose, anything could be addictive. And so I think with that sort of in mind, you know, reviewing the literature with kratom, one of the things that my students and I found is that, sure, I mean, there are some opioid-like effects of kratom that is corroborated by binding studies and efficacy studies and that sort of thing. And that's similar to drugs like morphine and fentanyl. Very different to drugs like morphine and fentanyl, it certainly appears that the active constituents of kratom do not act like morphine and fentanyl. They have a bit of a ceiling effect to them, so they don't fully activate receptors. They're not going to fully cause, as we heard earlier, respiratory depression and reward, that sort of thing. They also bind to other receptor targets that are thought to be involved in their antidepressant type activity and a little bit of their mild stimulant types of activities. Also when we talk about toxicology, there is some data that's out there from poison centers in the United States. There is a table in this 8-factor analysis that you have in front of you that shows that mitragynine, which is an active constituent of kratom, and calls to poison centers about kratom specifically, far fewer than for heroin and even methadone and fentanyl, prescription-grade fentanyl. We're seeing that the number of severe events in these poison center calls are far less frequent for mitragynine or for kratom as compared to these other substances, and the numbers of deaths that were a part of this study was also far fewer, even than methadone, which itself is an FDA-approved treatment for opioid use disorder. So as we look at potential for dependence, certainly there's some that's out there. However, as we heard a little bit earlier and is in this document, it does seem that in patients, it seems like it's much easier to wean yourself off of kratom as compared to other very strong opioids such as fentanyl. It certainly seems from preclinical studies, certainly I'm not an expert on clinical trials and that sort of thing, but from animal studies, preclinical studies, it certainly seems like kratom and kratom constituents can help with alleviating the withdrawal symptoms of opioids such as morphine. So I really want to respect your time, and so I'm glad to sit back and answer any questions that you might have for me.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Christopher. Any questions from the committee?
Representative Balde?
Thank you for your testimony. So you indicated that you have no beef in this at all. How did you get to know that the bill was scheduled today, and why did you come to testify?
Oh, sure. Great question. So, as an opioid chemist and a natural products chemist, with our natural products class, we were taking a look at trying to figure out something new to do that we hadn't done in a long time. With the pandemic and everything, it's very difficult to do some of the projects that we used to. And so we were looking for other creative ways to get our students interested, experience with regulatory affairs and with natural products and reading the literature and critically reviewing it. So we did that a year ago, and it just so happened that this is the sort of thing that was here in front of us. Other things with respect to kratom, as an opioid chemist, there's very few new and interesting things to study and to learn about. And I do know of several people, including Dr. Chris McCurdy, Lance McMahon, who are both chemists and pharmacologists in this space. I talk to them, they say, hey, that this is something that we're interested in, and kind of doing reviews. Wisconsin being one of the very few states in the United States that regulates it, I thought, this is kind of an interesting application.
Mm-hmm. So you also said you have some biases of favoritism towards natural products, right? How does that influence your position in terms of this particular bill?
So as a professor in a school of pharmacy, pharmacists love to talk about FDA-approved drugs and things that are very well regulated, and this dose is in this thing, and it's perfect. Pharmacists love that. So pharmacists kind of hate natural products as they are very differently regulated, and in many cases, they will contain things like adulterants, as we were hearing earlier, that can complicate their experiences. And so as a natural products chemist, I'm always interested in getting kind of that point across, is when you counsel your patients, there could be a remedy here, but there could also be other things happening. And so I really want to get across the point to my students, and hopefully here as well, that there's a lot of stuff that are unknown unknowns. And that's one of the things that kind of pushes me towards, correcting literature and reviewing literature.
So basically, you are still open to looking into this particular product and see the pros and cons of it, is it?
Yeah, so in this particular case, I wanted my students to review the literature critically, and I just thought this is a perfect opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for Christopher? If not, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you taking time.
Thank you all.
Next up, Dr. Butnager, did I get that right? Okay. And Mark Grapetime from the Wisconsin Medical Society and the Wisconsin Society of Addiction Medicine. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. You have the floor whenever you're ready.
All right, well, thanks so much. Mark Rappentine, Wisconsin Medical Society. Full disclosure, I am paid to be here today.
Oh, I know you are.
Right, that's, but I wanted to disclose that. You know, I wasn't able to be here at the last hearing. I was not fully vaccinated for COVID yet, and my folks did not want me to go into public spaces and provide testimony at the time, and so I'm sorry that I couldn't be here during the last hearing. I was going to have some brief introductions and then just get right to Dr. Bhatnagar, who has some very important real-world experiences in this area and knowledge of this. But I think I need to take just a couple minutes to do some corrections. So one of the first things we heard from the gentleman from the American Kratom Association, Kratom being a $1 billion a year industry, by the way, was that the reason that Representative John Nygren putting his HOPE agenda together back in 2014, and including 2 substances that are in Kratom, that the reason that he put those in there was because the FDA asked him to. Now, I've been around a while. You can tell by looking at me. I was very involved in talking with Representative Nygren and his staff back in 2014 during the horrors of the overdose epidemic and how that happened and what we were going to do to try to help work with medicine and others to fix this problem, which we have not fixed yet. When I heard the comment from the gentleman from the AKA, I reached out to the former chief of staff for Representative Nygren and said, this is what they're saying. Is that true? I don't remember that. And she said, seriously? No. So let's just correct that part of that testimony. A lot of attention paid to our state's Controlled Substances Board and what they do. Public citizens and others in state government whose responsibility is to make sure that they have an eye on what's going on in the state when it comes to potentially drugs that could potentially be a potential for abuse. There's a lot of talk you'll hear about this 8-factor test. You know, as if all 8 factors need to be satisfied for something to be scheduled, and that is not true. If you go to chapter 961.11 and look at what the Controlled Substances Board does, yes, they do list 8 factors, and they say in the statute, in making a determination regarding a substance, the board shall consider the following, and then it gives those 8. Appropriate. You don't want them just going off on any kind of, spree, and that's fine. Later on in this section, it says, after considering the factors enumerated in sub 1M, which is where the factors are, the Controlled Substances Board shall make findings with respect to them, which they did at their last hearing, as you've heard, and promulgate a rule controlling the substance upon finding that the substance has a potential for abuse. Has a potential for abuse. That's the key for the Controlled Substances Board, not some random 8-factor test that must be attributed every single point. So let's make sure that that's clear, because that's super important. And then let's talk about what the CSB actually said in its second resolution. So they said in their first one, and this was the AKA pushing for this, by the way, for the CSB to do this analysis, and it took them a long time. I think the CSB did a really wonderful job in being very deliberative and listening to everybody. And they said, yep, it doesn't satisfy all 8 factors. And they went one by one and said yes or no. And then they said, we want to make sure we're not sending the inappropriate signal to the legislature that we're somehow okay with this and that it should be descheduled. So instead, they had that second resolution, and it says, although the board voted that all 8 factors were not met, the board's investigation raised significant concerns on some factors. Therefore, the board does not recommend any action to deschedule Kratom. So let's get that clear, because that's an important point as well. The one that really, really makes me very interested is this citation of the American Medical Association and how they went through this resolution process. Much like the Wisconsin Medical Society, we are driven by policies that are established. They're public. You can look at them. The AMA goes through a similar process. Before this hearing, I was kind of alerted that there might be some kind of documentation provided in the AKA testimony that would cite the AMA. I think it had, I don't know if you guys have this or not. I honestly don't know if it made it into the final version or not. But it was a document that at the top of it had the name of a AMA attorney named Daniel Blaney Cohn, who I know very well. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, by the way, I'm seeing that this is happening. What's the story? Because they're saying that, oh, the AKA says that you guys are okay with Kratom now. And they are not okay with Kratom now. The email I got from Dan, the document provided to me by the Wisconsin Medical Society was not created by the AMA, and the AMA was not asked to verify whether the document was accurate. The document is misleading and should not be construed to suggest the AMA supports increasing access to Kratom. The only substantive information that should be relied upon by the legislature is the specific language of AMA policy, which calls for additional research for safety and efficacy to determine Kratom's appropriateness for sale to consumers, including whether it can be marketed or prescribed as a treatment for any condition. Whatever organization or individual that created the document should cease use immediately. That's what the AMA told me. You know, in Wisconsin, we like to check our sources, and we don't like to quote people unless they have, you've been there or they've given you the permission to do so. So the law was created by John Nygren back in the day, and a lot of us know why. And it's in there for a reason. The Controlled Substances Board has done their actions, and now we know why. And that's the facts there. And the American Medical Association has updated their policy, but absolutely they say, you know, a user shouldn't be thrown in prison for using Kratom. Absolutely. Sure. That's fine. But they also say you should not just let this stuff loose outside of any kind of scheduling. Last point before Dr. Bhatnagar, and thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chair. Dealing with pain is something that my physicians struggle over with their patients because it's so difficult. And people can be so desperate to get their pain taken care of and alleviated, they will turn to anything. State after state after state. You talk about Googling, well, you can find a whole bunch of stuff. And there is a subreddit called Quitting Kratom. And you know, some of you who are younger know what Reddit's all about. I just know about it because some young person told me. But you go to a subreddit, it's called Quitting Kratom. There are 38,500 members of that subreddit. Story after story after story of how they are trying to get over it and done because they started because they were addicted to opioids or they have pain. And it was available over the counter or in a health store or at a gas station, and they're like, it's safe. They start taking it, and then they need more, and then they need more sometimes, and then they need more, and then all of a sudden, they are addicted. 38,500 people have chosen to go on this subreddit and follow it and share their stories. So if you have a chance to take a look at that, don't discount the stories you hear from patients in Wisconsin about their dealing with pain, because that is just as real. And we all have to work together to find ways to help these people. I'm not discounting that whatsoever. But to hear that it's not addictive, oh, it's like coffee, which is why this bill's regulation is to add it as a food product, not schedule it, but just be a food product. That's very different. And any kind of substance that is being suggested by some organizations, it can be helpful with opioid abuse, it can be helpful as pain, that's medicine and that's a treatment. And that's something that's very different than having DATCAP look at it. Dr. Bhatnagar is someone I hold in very high esteem because she's a lot calmer than I am on things. And she can bring a clinical perspective in Wisconsin to what's going on in this issue. and I'm very pleased to have her here today.
Thank you, Mark. Can you all hear me all right? Thanks. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the members of the Committee on State Affairs. My name is Dr. Ritu Bhatnagar. I am speaking from the perspective of a physician deeply involved in the treatment of addiction. I'm a licensed psychiatrist who specializes in addiction psychiatry. I've worked for a decade in a specialty addiction treatment setting, and additionally, I'm president of the Wisconsin Society of Addiction Medicine, which is the medical specialty society representing physicians and other clinicians in Wisconsin who specialize in both the prevention and the treatment of addiction. I'm here today on behalf of Wisconsin Society of Addiction Medicine and the Wisconsin Medical Society to testify in opposition to this Assembly Bill 393. And I'm going to tell you why. You have just heard Mark tell you a lot of things to counter some of the testimony you heard. You have a copy of my testimony as well. What I want to highlight, and I was hoping I didn't need to go into the science so much of what Kratom actually is, but that's something we haven't heard much of, despite people up here talking from a scientific perspective. They haven't shared with you that it is an herbal extract, but it's an intoxicating herbal extract, and it has many active components to it. Mitragynine is one of them. 7-hydroxymitragynine is what that gets broken down to. These are words that many physicians don't know anything about. Toxicologists haven't heard a lot about this. It's not being tested for routinely because it is a specialized test that has to be sent on request. It's a blood test, and it takes about a week to get the results back, if you're lucky. It's not something that people know to test for. There isn't any dipstick urine drug screen like there is for fentanyl or opioids or other things that we have become all too familiar with. What we do know, and Kratom is one of these fascinating plants from a scientific perspective, absolutely fascinating. At lower doses, it does have these stimulating properties you've heard about. That can be a good thing. People think, great, I have a little bit more energy. At higher doses, it has opioid-like properties. That's where the pain relief part comes from. What we don't know yet is at what dose which person will react in what way. And higher doses, which are often needed with tolerance, which has been shown to be developed to Kratom. That's why there's a Quitting Kratom subreddit, because people are physiologically dependent on Kratom. And the withdrawal symptoms that are seen from Kratom are the same as for other opioids. I'm going to just pause and let that sink in for a second. The very things that people are taking Kratom to help with, opioid withdrawal symptoms, is what they experience when they stop taking Kratom. So it makes sense that it would alleviate opioid withdrawal symptoms because it has opioid-like properties. So we get into this very dangerous cycle very quickly with any claim that's made that says we're going to be able to fix the opioid epidemic. We are desperate in this state, in this country. These are really hard times. I see that on a daily basis. I work with colleagues who continue to struggle to try to find the right treatments for their patients in the right ways. It's not just the medicine. It's a lot more than that that's needed. Kratom is not the magic solution here to the opioid epidemic. So I ask you to think very carefully about that aspect of it, which is under your control, which is concern for the public health. And that is why I'm here, because I am speaking on behalf of the Wisconsin Society of Addiction Medicine out of concern for the public health, not for profit. I am here to worry about my patients who are taking any number of substances. They may not know what's in them. If Kratom's in there, they may not know. If there are benzodiazepines in there, fentanyl, xylazine, there's so many different things. What we do know is Kratom does cause respiratory depression with these opioid-like properties. A colleague of mine, Dr. Galvis Reg, he testified in 2018 in a situation where the person had overdosed, and he reported that at the time of his death, The young man's toxicology results showed no other opioids, benzodiazepines, or controlled substances in his system, only metragenine and his prescribed medications, none of which was a controlled substance. That happened in 2018, and that's one case that actually went to trial. That also is in opposition to the statements you heard that there have been no overdoses linked only to Kratom. So I just ask you to think about the information you're hearing, and I'm glad you're asking, Representative, about the sources that might be helping bring the testimonies forward. My source is my inspiration of taking care of the people of my community. I'm currently working with students as well. These are very vulnerable populations. They need our help. They need to make sure that when we decide something is safe, and we say it's generally regarded as safe when it becomes a dietary supplement, that it actually is safe. I do not believe that the information we have been presented so far demonstrates that. My experience doesn't allow me to say anything different than that we need to be very, very careful with how we proceed in this state. This is not a panacea. It is not safe to be consumed in the way that it's being suggested. We're in this crisis. We've just seen about the Sacklers. We've gotten a lot of money from their settlements. The Sacklers knew about the risks of opioids, and society was hit with the harms that we're all living and suffering from now. I don't want this to be another situation a decade from now where we're having the same conversation. I'm very concerned. And what I really sincerely hope that you'll take away from my testimony today is that this is an unregulated compound so far. Regulations can be helpful with the right oversight. We need to have an appropriate discussion, conversation, public discussion that's evidence-based. And there is no evidence that Kratom is an appropriate treatment for opioid use disorder. It is not based on science, just anecdotal information again. The FDA, again, we've talked about the FDA. We can impeach the FDA. That's not in my interest. What I'm saying is that we already have existing effective treatments for opioid use disorder. We've heard about buprenorphine. We've heard about methadone. There's naltrexone. What we need is more access to these treatments. I would ask respectfully that the state spend its resources and its efforts to try to increase the appropriate access to the appropriate scientifically based approved treatments that exist in the state rather than on something like this. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate your perspective. Any questions for the doctor or Mark from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, you guys. Next up, John Schinholzer, followed by the Sheriff's Association. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me.
You bet.
My name's John Schinholzer. I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorders. I've been clean and sober over 41 years. I got clean in the Marine Corps in between my second and third deployment and been just, getting it done ever since. 19 years ago, me and my wife started a recovery center in Richmond, Virginia, because we noticed a lot of the addicts and alcoholics weren't getting help. They were dying, going to jail. So I put my career aside. She kept hers, and we started a recovery organization. We started in the 56 square foot office, and today we're in a 15,000 square foot facility, 165 beds. We're in 5 different jails, reentry programs, multi-million-dollar a year budget, a platinum charity. Have had over 1 million consumers come through our program or our building in the last 19 years, and 10,000 alumni that actually did the 28-day program and the sober living. Long story short, I've been around a while. I even came out here to Eagle Eagle River a few years ago and helped Jay and Mary develop a Violence County Jail program, a reentry program, which we're very proud of. The few years back, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, we do a lot of drug testing, okay? And Kratom started coming up on our drug test. And I started bringing the kids in, and kids, they might be under 50 or whatever. I said, what the hell is this? I never heard of this, so I Google it. And I see what you see, 20 pages of what the FDA and the DEA said. And I said, look, this got to be bad. And these one after another, see, I couldn't tell they were on drugs. They were doing really good, okay? They weren't exhibiting symptoms of a relapse or other drugs or drinking. And one by one, they would say, look, I take a therapeutic dose. I don't abuse it. It helps me, with anxiety, PTSD. We get a lot of veterans, PTSD. I got pain. I got myalgia, whatever. I said, well, we have a policy here. You can't take this here, okay? We get our policies from what we're reading off the internet and what the FDA says. So for years, we had to exit perfectly good recovering people in their engagement, doing fine. And, and then one of the kids said, well, go talk to these Kratom people. So I go over there and I start talking to these guys distributing. I said, what the hell are you doing? What is this stuff that, the FDA says this? Well, they started showing me some real science that they have access to, and come to find out there are hundreds of, like Dr. Jack testified to, of evidence-based science on this product. And then I noticed, well, every now and then these addicts and alcoholics, see, they like to substitute one form of using for another. Nobody wants to get fully clean, it seems. They want to smoke a joint, drink a beer, or whatever. So some of them would actually take Kratom as a substitute, not as a therapy. And some of those folks, out of thousands of Kratom consumers, I've actually seen a handful, I can count on one hand, that came back what I would call dependent on Kratom. They had a terrible time with it. But here's the good news. You take less over a few weeks and you wean it off. It's not like other drugs. See, alcohol, you stop alcohol, you can go into seizures and die. It's hard to wean off alcohol. Opiates, you go into opiate withdrawal, the pain is great, trust me. This is a product that we discovered that you just do less, you can get off. But remember, when you're in active addiction, you're mentally ill. You're in that psychic state where you want to do anything. So, make a long story short, I've noticed a lot of people, after I've done my research, I talk to these guys, I listen to them, I'll hear what everybody's saying over a 7-year period. And we have a plant-based product readily available that 85% of the consumers find appropriate use for. And that Hopkins paper did mention 3% that we're going to have some sort of addiction issue. So it is possible it can happen. In Virginia, it's always been legal, and we recently got the KCB, the protection plan passed. So I've never seen a problem with public safety, with the police, the sheriffs, not in Virginia, with the exception of maybe kids. That's why they had to put an age limit on it, because you know how kids are. When you're 15, 16, you can do anything to get high. Hell, I smoked pepper when I was a kid, thinking I might get high on it. But that's a different story. But I read that AMA report that both teams have cited, okay? One gave the spin side to the left, one gave the spin side to the right. I actually read that thing, and the reason I read it, because my wife, she just retired on Capitol Hill after 30 years of being a healthcare lobbyist. She got the mental health addiction parity bill passed. She worked for Betty Ford for 10 years. She had mental health and addiction as part of one of the 10 essential benefits in the Affordable Care Act. She actually was American Society of Addiction Medicine lobbyist for 5-6 years. She helped get Suboxone, the limits lifted. So I know a little bit about how left and right spin go. That's the only reason I say that. And I read that report, and it made it real clear that, number one, this is an and I'm going to combine it with what Nor Volkov said. This is an emerging, promising practice, an incredibly effective tool that has already proven to reduce the effect of opioid epidemic that has had on our nation. Keeping in mind the FDA was the one that co-signed OxyContin as a safe, non-addictive drug, okay? So take some of that with a grain of salt, but the point is, we do want more science on it, we need more science on it. But at the same time, it's a safe, effective plant for most adult responsible consumers. I would only be here because for the last 5-6 years, I've been getting on these Kratom boys, but I said, look, if you want me to help you with this, you have got to keep it away from kids. You know, Americans got a prevention problem. You know that, don't you? We can't keep them off of nicotine, alcohol. We can't even keep them off of sugar, for God's sakes, man. I mean, a third of our kids are obese. So, but the American Kratom Association, they're the responsible ones in the bunch. They're the ones that want consumer protection. They want proper testing, packaging, do away with underage use, unadulterated products. So you actually got the good guys in here. And Mr. Baldwin, I know you're going to ask me who's paying me. So I'm a full-time employee of the McShane Foundation, a true charity recovery center. However, I told Mac a while back after he heard me testify in Virginia for free, of course. He said, "Can you help us in other places?" I said, "Look, you got to cover my expenses, buy me lunch, reimburse me for my time, I'll be glad to do it." And that's because I'm passionate and I believe in it. I'm a no common sense person. You want your kids shooting fentanyl, one pill kill, or you want them taking Kratom? Real simple stuff here. And do you want your loved one they've been drinking a fifth of liquor a day, but yet they can take a couple scoops of Kratom and stay off alcohol? Absolutely. This is and of all the drugs I've seen people become addicted to, you name them, I've seen. I mean, I'm talking dust bunnies and everything. But Kratom is the most least harmful, the least dangerous. As long as it's pure, unadulterated product, that's the best in the bunch. And I'm sorry, but this is to me a no-brainer. Wisconsin, you guys, man, you got great cheese. You may as well get great Kratom up in here and make it safe. You know, think about it for a minute. Our drug supply is poisoned in America. You know, if anything that's not safely manufactured, packaged, and had available for adults, anything else is subject to contamination, dangerous. I'm glad to be here. You know, I've been listening for a while. And one other thing, I noticed Suboxone doctors do not like Kratom. And I've talked to a lot of Suboxone doctors in Virginia. I actually trained a lot of them in their own addiction medicine, how to deal with the addiction community. And I'm a big fan of Suboxone, but my God, don't everybody need to be on that? You know, they don't need to worry. There's going to be a lot of customers coming for the next 20, 30 years. This epidemic ain't going nowhere, that opioid epidemic. You know, so I hate to see these industries jockeying for position on market shares, and I see that happening in the Suboxone industry, and it's sad to see it, but that's something you got to think about. And our law enforcement, they got bigger problems. They don't need to be messing with whether Kratom's legal or illegal. I've never seen one Kratom-related crime in Virginia that I can recall. It's a crime if it's illegal. Some states, you know, they spend in tens of thousands of dollars arresting people for Kratom. It doesn't make sense to me. It's below the level of Mexican weed. Back in the 70s, we used to smoke. It ain't even the get high component ain't nothing. No self-respecting addict really wants to use Kratom as a get high drug. So I hate to ask if there's any questions. I think I tried to answer them all if I could.
Well, I'll ask for you. Is there any questions for John from the committee? Yes, President Brooks.
First, I want to know if you're going out for happy hour, because you're a hell of an entertainer.
I don't need to use nothing. I get fired up, man.
I'm kidding. So, you know, we keep hearing anecdotal evidence, this contrary studies. My colleague just showed me a report that there was, from Ohio, 150 deaths related to Kratom in Ohio. between 16 and 17, but I remember the last session when we had the law enforcement, I asked that question, and it was nothing here in the state related to Kratom. So you and your wife have been heavily involved in this for a long time. How many patients have you treated through your
We've
facility?
had over 9,500 actual people came through our 28-day program and our sober living program, but we get about 80,000 consumer visits a year, because we're like this open 7-day-a-week recovery center, so a ton.
So 80,000 people is a little more than anecdotal.
87,000 a year, over 1 million consumers in the last 19 years using, we have 2,500 open to the public groups and meetings and a week a year in our facility. It's a pretty incredible place.
And did you say you thought about 3% of the Kratom users through your
According
facility?
to the John Hopkins survey
Okay.
that I read, only the bottom 3% was subject to having a Kratom, what I would call they get addicted to Kratom. That's how I read it.
How about at your facilities?
I've seen hundreds of people consume the product at a appropriate level that we couldn't tell anything was wrong, but I had several, I think like 5 or 6 people over all this time that doubled back and said, I'm strung out on Kratom, I need help. And 3 of the 5, they weaned off over a 2-week period, doing less every day. Remember, it's a lot of psychological stuff, like quitting smoking. And 2 of them went to a Suboxone doctor that put them on Suboxone to get them off of Kratom.
Okay, in one of the reports here from the Wisconsin Medical Society, said when people overdose on Kratom, Narcan is effective?
You know what?
And I'm asking.
BS right there. That's gotta be. I'd like to use my real language, but I can't. But
I bet you would.
I listened to that woman up here a minute ago saying how they had this one death Kratom, and she said like Kratom only, but then she said but they were on their prescribed medication. I mean, right there's a multiple of drugs, and I don't think to OD on Kratom you'd have to eat a 5-gallon bucket, I think, and I'm not even sure that would do it. What everybody's saying is, I know it doesn't make sense, but
Well, I get that. So in the medical society, so you think the percentage for addiction, however you want to use the word addiction or
Right.
abuse or dependency, is pretty minimal. In their study, they say 50-fold increase cases from 2011-13 to 682 reported to the Poison Control Center. Well, I then looked up the Poison Control Center, and CBD, which is legal all over, there was less than 100 cases in 17 and 3,400 cases related to CBD overdoses.
well,
And I can't find, when I Googled Kratom, it was all over the map too. But you,
I'm 100% convinced there's bad blood between Kratom, FDA, because the National Association of Counties actually had the DEA go around really talking the worst thing they can about Kratom. They got it in for them, and I think unjustly, because somebody at the top teed off somebody else. And the CBD, the problem there, not to get off subject, but it's the candy and the gummies that kids get hold of.
Yeah.
That's the whole, so, think about that moving forward, no gummies, no candy.
so in Virginia where you are, you use strictly regulated, licensed Kratom?
Well,
Or was it not legal at the time and you were?
in all the treatment centers in Virginia, and probably nationwide, they will only recommend and prescribe FDA-approved drugs. You have got to be a non-clinical organization to recommend or co-sign the use of plant-based products. I call this plant-based. My own organization breaks my heart that they give me such a hard time about this after we have case after case after case that, look, I'm telling you, we got it wrong on the Kratom. And I'm the founder of this place, which I'm just president emeritus now because we did our succession plan. But I am diligently working to open up plant-based recovery centers and really drill down on this because, you get old timers like me and Jay involved in this business, and we're gonna get the results we need without the BS.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for being here.
Any other questions for John? Representative Balde?
Thank you, Chair. John, thank you for your testimony. Where do you say you operate? Just within the state here or where?
The McShin program is in Richmond, Virginia, but the model is the most sought-after mirrored model nationwide amongst recovering communities and emerging recovering community organizations. So we don't rebrand McShin every place we go. Like, we're doing a technical assistance for states where we create models for the states and training, peer training. We pioneered peer. You hear the word peer recovery support services, and we're the pioneers in Virginia and actually nationally, but they change names wherever they go.
Have you ever done any work in the state of Wisconsin or no?
Say that again?
Have you ever done any work?
Yeah, in Eagle River, right there. I got Eagle River in the house, man, at Ballas County Jail, man. I mean, and I've presented many times at events up here, peer events and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. So you also mentioned during your testimony that you generally rely on what you read on the internet and what FDA puts out there. How reliable is your internet source, but also do you depend on any other scientific form of
100%. See, I was one of those people, if I don't know, if I'm not educated about something, that makes me ignorant, okay? But once I get educated, I get the science behind me, I'm no longer allowed to remain ignorant. You know, if I defy the science based on ideology, that makes me arrogant. And I already got a problem with humility, so I ain't trying to be arrogant too. So my research, which I do, I look at all the TV stations, all the papers. I don't get my information on Facebook alone, okay? So I spent 6 years paying attention to Kratom and the science and the scientists. So I get to see it all. And in my common sense, conventional wisdom says this is a no-brainer plant that has a rightful place in every community in America, and nobody should restrict it from responsible adult consumption or access. And I've seen the benefit that has provided so many people with so many problems, especially addicts. And that's why I'm here, because I believe in it. I've seen the miracle behind it.
So how often do you work with law enforcement?
Every day. I'm on jail.
And so what is the
Tuesday
relationship?
night you see me in jail. You can watch a live podcast. We got a jail program in Rickel County, Virginia. I work with, hell, we got the former drug czar of the United States in here today. I mean, I work with law enforcement. I'm a friend of Blue. I mean, we work together. We got synergy. You know, I'm not against law enforcement.
Right, so then how does the relationship come about? How do you work with them?
We do engagement in the community, like overdoses or people get arrested. We do a lot of work in the courtrooms. We have jail programs and reentry programs. And a lot of times we'll speak together. I mean, I got lots of law enforcement, but I don't all of them like me either, though, so.
All right. If they were to tell you that they do not tend to support the legalization of this product, what would you say to them?
Well, look, you got to respect your law enforcement, but you got to watch why they don't want to support it. You know, sometimes special interest plays a big role, and sometimes special interest has a way of being above what's really right for the citizens and the people. And I'm savvy enough to know the difference between special interest. When I can smell special interest a mile away, and I know what's right and what's better. And sometimes in America, even in law enforcement, they have a tendency, it's kind of like political parties, you know, like if you go against your party, you get primaried. I mean, what's that all about? It's like,
I don't know.
All politics are local, man. You got to serve your constituents. You answer to them, not the people above you. And sometimes agencies get like that too. So.
All right, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry for doing that. Thank you. Y'all have a great day. Yep. Yep.
Next up, we'll have Dale Schmidt from the Badger State Sheriff's Association and Sean Patrick from the Franklin Police Department.
Doing great. You? Nowhere else I'd rather be today. Thank you. I'll start and I'll let the sergeant go here after me and give you some of his perspective. Most of you have seen me before. A few years ago, I was the only law enforcement representative on this topic here. So here I am again to talk about it again. Dale Schmidt, I'm the president of the Badger State Sheriff's Association. I also represent the Wisconsin Sheriff's and Deputy Sheriff's Association, and I'm also the sheriff in Dodge County. I listened to a lot of different testimony here, took a lot of different notes, and I'm going to try and summarize some of this. I'll start with my qualification here, and it's the same qualification that he has. We are both nationally recognized drug recognition experts, and I'll tell you that 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago when we were here, 2 or 3 years ago when I was here, we really didn't have a whole lot of information about Kratom. We're still learning about it. Even at DREs, like, what is Kratom? That was a very real thing. Drug recognition experts, our real role in life in law enforcement is to identify what impairs, what substances are in the human body that can affect a person's ability to operate a motor vehicle safely. That's what we're looking for. And we have long training of trying to identify what the different substances are. And so that gives us some unique perspective related to the various drugs that are out there. Some of the things that I've recognized here, there is a long list, and I think that Representative Hong, I believe before, went through the list that all oppose this bill. And there's good reason to that. I'm not going to go through and recite all of that again. I think the Kratom Association has good intentions here. I don't want to besmirch the Kratom Association. They have good intentions, but the problem is they don't see what's going on the front lines. They're not out there like we are, seeing what's happening, and I say that as an administrator. Yes, I get out there in the street too. Seeing what's going on out in the streets. They're not out there in the hospital room seeing what the nurses are seeing. They're not seeing the front lines impacts of what's going on. And since I've been here last, we have seen an increase in the use and misuse of Kratom in Wisconsin. I've seen it in Dodge County. We have seen that increase. I do want to make some corrections because and the doctor made some good corrections on the Kratom Association. I also have to make a correction. Don't cite somebody incorrectly when they're in the room. I did not, and I believe it was you, Representative Snicky, that asked me about, do we have the ability to test? And I believe at the time, I said, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure if we do or not, but I didn't know. And I was cited earlier today saying that I said, no, we don't. I didn't know that information, and I wouldn't have said, no, we don't, because I'm not an expert in that area. We have some experts in that area that can tell you those things. They're not here. I think you should ask them. They're individuals from the State Lab of Hygiene and the Wisconsin Crime Lab. I think you should specifically reach out to them and have those people come here and talk to you before moving to anything forward, because those people are wicked smart, all right? They know what they're talking about, and they can come in here and they can give you the facts on how many people have overdosed on these things, because they get all of those. They can tell you how many people have been arrested on Kratom, because they get all of those, but they're not here. It's a state organization. I can understand why they wouldn't voluntarily come in, because, you know, you do their budgets and all of that, but there's some behind-the-scenes stuff that a lot of times state organizations don't come in and testify. But if you ask them, I bet they will. I wish you would, because they're very intelligent people, and I know they would love to talk to you. And they could give you a lot of the answers that you don't have. The State Crime Lab and the Hygiene Lab. You should be reaching out and asking them before you move this forward. Some other things that I think are really important. I have never once heard citizens ask for this. I haven't. The last time when I testified in front of you, I was the only one from Wisconsin. The only person from Wisconsin testified in front of you. There's a lot of money being poured into this. And it really does make me nervous about what the gentleman before me said, special interest. It's a for-profit organization, and it really makes me wonder, why is this getting pushed so hard when nobody in Wisconsin knew what the heck it was before all of this started? And now it's starting to pour in. We're seeing it in big amounts in traffic stops. It is coming here now because people are the attention is being brought to it. Nobody knew what it was. Why is it being pushed? I don't understand that. I have no understanding of why in the legislature people are saying so hard we need to get this done. When our own citizens in our own communities are not asking for this. So what is the push? I don't get it. Legalization, legalization, legalization. That's what we're all hearing across the country. Legalization of all these drugs. Have you seen what's going on in Oregon when they start legalizing all these things? Oregon is now looking at reversing course because they've legalized too much. There's articles coming out that their legislature is starting to look at that. Be careful. You start legalizing these things, you're going to start regretting it. This and many of other substances. I could go through some of the Wisconsin Medical Society did a really nice job of citing not only the FDA, but the DEA, medical experts citing it as unsafe and ineffective. The Mayo Clinic, you've talked about those things. I'm not going to go over some of those things. But some of the things the known side effects, I found this interesting. Kratom has a number of known side effects that affect the mind and nervous system. Dizziness, drowsiness, hallucinations, delusion, depression, breathing suppression, seizure, coma. Those are all the exact same things that we look for when we're doing an evaluation on a subject when they're impaired by a substance out on the road. This is an impairing substance. I know there's a lot of other, there's two sides to every story, I get that. But these are coming from the FDA, DEA, these aren't like 3, 4, 5-year-old studies. This is information coming out from the FDA recently, within the last couple of years. One other thing that I kept hearing earlier was, well, all the other states are doing it, so shouldn't we? Well, I'll ask you this. All the other states have made first offense OWI a crime. Shouldn't we? We don't always do what the other states do. First offense OWI in the state of Wisconsin is still an ordinance violation. It's not a crime. So shouldn't we do the same thing there? A lot of things here point to not good things. There's still things that we need to learn, but we are learning more and more each and every day. I went to one of our DRE research just last week, and I sat there and I listened to the horror stories of all these DREs making traffic stops or going out to crashes. He'll share with you one of those incidents. Well, people being passed out behind the wheel, getting involved in crashes, and it's becoming more and more and more frequent. Interestingly enough, many of these are right outside of bigger cities like Hudson PD, right outside the Twin Cities. It's interesting that frequently that always happens when it starts just outside of the bigger cities. I urge you to please do some more research. I'm going to ask you again, please reach out to the lab and talk to the lab, both of them, because they've got good information for you. I'm going to ask you, please vote no on this. Don't let this move forward. Get more research on this. Again, I understand that the Kratom Association has good intentions here, but I think there's a lot of dollars behind it too. And that scares me. Why are so many dollars? I have never been sheriff for 9 years now, and have been doing lobbying quite a bit. You've seen me before. I have never seen so many lobbyists on one topic against something that law enforcement has been involved with. This is unheard of for all of us. I'm sure you see that more often in your, but a law enforcement topic, we have never seen a lobbyist come that hard. And not just one lobbyist, there's several lobbyists here involved with this one. It's interesting. I'm asking you, please vote no on this. Don't let this move through. We're doing this for public safety. There's no public or private special interest for law enforcement related to this. We want to keep our people safe. We're tired of going to crashes where people are dying or seriously being injured, overdoses, all of these things. It's overwhelming, the amount of things that we are seeing out there. Please don't add to that. So I'll turn it over to the sergeant for his portion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Sean Paddock. I'm a police sergeant with the city of Franklin, which is the southwesternmost municipality in Milwaukee County. I've been a police officer for 13 years, and for the last 9, I've been a DRE, just like Sheriff Schmidt. I've also been heavily involved in training law enforcement throughout the state in drug recognition and impaired driving investigation. I've probably trained in the ballpark of hundreds of officers throughout the state. And I'm also very active in impaired driving enforcement. I've probably made somewhere in the ballpark of 375 to 400 OWI arrests in my career. I do have a special interest. It's public safety. I come before you as a law enforcement officer, as a father, as a son, as a husband, because I have seen, unfortunately, folks, the ramifications of drug and alcohol abuse in our society, whether it be addiction, whether it be motor vehicle crashes, the crime that occurs with substance abuse as people unfortunately get to that point where they become addicted, and next thing you know is they resort to property crime to continue getting their fix. I've made death notifications to folks who have had loved ones die either in motor vehicle crashes or drug overdoses or homicides. I have a button on my uniform that says life-saving. One of the life-saving awards I was given was for reviving someone who was dying of a heroin overdose. I carry Narcan with me anytime I'm in uniform. It's a department policy. I've had to use this more than I'd like to say. Please don't. I'm not a lock them up and throw them away that key kind of a guy. Okay, I've dealt with addiction in my family since I was a child. My father is a alcoholic. I have actually not physically seen him in 5 years. He has not met two of his grandchildren. It is what it is, but there are a lot of things that we deal with in our society, and as law enforcement, we are that front line a lot of the time. We're the ones that are getting those calls. We are the first on scene, and we try to pick up the pieces, and we're trying to, make it safe for everyone. So that is my special interest, is public safety. I will echo a lot of things that were said today by the sheriff, but I would like to share with you one story really quick here, which is kind of ironic. I didn't know this bill was coming before the assembly, and I received an email last week advising of such, and anyone that had any type of experience dealing with kratom intoxication, if they'd be available to testify. Well, coincidentally, Labor Day weekend, we did have an incident in the city of Franklin where we had a gentleman who was under the influence of kratom that was called in driving a motor vehicle. This gentleman was called in, and the report was that he was swerving, stopping at green lights, and cutting people off. Officers checked the area for the subject. They could not locate him. And approximately 10 minutes later, we got a second call regarding the same vehicle, where the subject was now passed out behind the wheel at a major intersection in our city, which is 76th and Ross. And gentleman was passed out behind the wheel. Vehicle was still in drive, passed out with his foot on the brake. Luckily, officers were able to arrive there in time and make the vehicle safe, make sure he was safe. It was to the point where the officers actually had to rap on the window to get the subject awake. He was given field sobriety tests on the scene, and one thing that was really interesting was that he had this yellow residue coming out of both nostrils that was basically surrounding his lips. And in law enforcement for 13 years, I've dealt with people who have snorted drugs and whatnot, but to see that, I'd actually never seen anything like that in my 13-year career. This gentleman was subsequently taken into custody for OWI. He submitted to a blood draw, which the toxicology is pending, so it's going to be very interesting to see what pans out with that. I was called after the fact to do what's called a drug influence evaluation on this subject. So I was with him for the better part of an hour, doing field sobriety tests, doing additional tests that we are trained to do as DREs. And during the evaluation, he actually admitted that he had ingested kratom earlier in the evening, and that was the substance that was coming out of his nose. One thing that I think is very interesting, and no pun intended, but I had heard some dialogue earlier with respect to labeling. All right, and I'm going to go on a limb here, and I would argue that everyone on the committee at some point in time has probably taken some type of prescription medication in their life. Am I right? All right, I'm going to go with that. Certain types of drugs have labels on them that say do not operate heavy machinery or operate a motor vehicle. Would you like to know what this gentleman did for work? He worked in a heavy machine shop, and he admitted that he had ingested said substance while at work. And then, because I'm sure he's struggling to make ends meet, he's also a Lyft driver. So when he was taken into custody, he was driving his Lyft vehicle, and he had admitted that he had taken 4 to 5 fares in between the time that he used kratom and when he had passed out behind the wheel in traffic. This is one situation, and I'm not saying it's the catch-all for everything. I'm simply, as many people have come before the committee today, study all the facts. Please investigate, speak to folks that make a lot more money and have a lot more acronyms after their name than I do, because I certainly don't. But all I can give you is the opinion of a street cop who takes what I do. I have a lot of pride in my position as a law enforcement officer and doing what I can do to keep our communities safe. So thank you very much for your time, and if anyone has any questions, I'll certainly happy to answer those.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for both what you do, and thank you for taking time to give us your perspective and your testimony. Any questions for Dale or Sean from the committee? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Sheriff, as you said, a few years ago, nobody heard of Kratom. When this was heard last session, I had no clue what it was, and I think that could be said for most members of the committee. And you also said, officer, you said, that there's, I think what you said, there's a lot more overdoses on Kratom than we hear about. Do you think that's because, I know a lot of times there's suicides that aren't reported out in the press in certain areas because you don't want copycats. Is there something like that going on, do you think, with Kratom? I don't know, I'm just curious.
I don't know that I could speak to that,
Okay.
being factual. I think going back to some of the other comments about medical examiners and what's all in the system, that's a really good question. I think probably for medical examiners and not so much for
Yeah.
cops. We don't have that necessary information regarding what's in their system. The medical examiners do that, and we really wouldn't be educated or qualified to
Right,
answer that.
yeah, we just never hear about this on, through the media or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Representative Brooks?
Gentlemen, thanks for your testimony. When was this arrest made?
This was actually on September 3rd of this year.
Okay, so recently.
Very
How long does it
recently.
usually take to get your toxicology? And I know that's a huge problem here in the state, is the turnaround on that.
Sure. Well, this was a first offense, so the specimen was sent to the State Lab of Hygiene. They have a huge backlog. Also, they have staffing issues that they deal with. So generally speaking, we get blood results specific to drugs usually within a year. So, and that's something that we're dealing with on a constant basis, because people will be arrested for operating while intoxicated, and we're not getting, alcohol is a lot faster, don't get me wrong, and the lab is doing everything they possibly can do. But I could literally go through cases and cases and cases at our jurisdiction alone where we're awaiting blood results so we can continue, the case. The case can be adjudicated in court, and we're waiting a long time. So the wheels of justice, unfortunately, are going very slow in that regard.
And Sheriff, can you answer this for me? I know last time when you were here to testify, and other people, there was a little conflicting testimony between law enforcement and the lab saying, we don't test for Kratom. Do you know, are they always testing for Kratom? So when you made this arrest, Sheriff, or Sergeant, do you have to request additional testing, or is it a basic test and they always test for Kratom now? Because we got conflicting stories last time. Sure. I want to make sure that we are at least testing for Kratom when we pull somebody over for an OWI.
Sure. So specifically with the DRE program, we have an outstanding relationship with our State Lab of Hygiene and also the crime lab. That's where our blood specimens initially go. What we do as DREs is anytime that we're involved in a case where we perform an evaluation, we actually forward a copy of our report to the lab. So, and they actually have the crime lab, and the hygiene lab also has analysts that have been trained as DREs. They've been part of our program, which is a great relationship that we have. So they're provided a lot more information on the front end than just simply 2 vials of blood in a box. So they're able to they still do their initial screening, and the analysts that work there could testify a lot better than I could in that respect. But they do their initial screening, and if the DRE suspects a certain category of drugs or drug that's being utilized, if that lab can't test for it themselves, there are other labs throughout the country that they can forward the specimen to be tested.
And related to the other part about the conflicting information, I think you may have misunderstood me. I don't think I ever said they don't test for it. I believe I said I don't know if they test for it, because that's not my area of expertise. I don't know what they all test for. I said I wasn't aware that they tested for it, and we'd never seen kratom before, so I didn't know if anything would come back. So I think there may have been some confusion there, but I certainly didn't say absolutely not, they don't test it.
Okay. Do we know currently that it always gets tested?
When
now?
they do a drug screen, I believe, and that's a good question for the lab, I don't want to
Okay,
speak
go
for
ahead.
them.
Yep.
But they are testing, I know they are testing for kratom, I just don't know at what limits they're testing. When they do alcohol and it's over a .12, they cancel a drug screen, so they're not doing it on those. But when they're doing the other drug screens, I'm not sure what limits they're testing it at.
I appreciate the clarification. Can you also tell me, do you know off the top of your head the number of verified OWIs that have been, I guess, backed up by the toxicology report? Because I know when you pull somebody over, sometimes they're not always honest with police officers.
This is news to me.
Yeah, I know.
News to me.
But as somebody who's going through some of this right now, the truth comes out much later. The toxicology reports may or may not show things that weren't
And again-
testified about or people didn't give testimony to. So I guess I just want to know, we have to know that number if we are testing, and I'll ask the lab, if we've been testing the last year or so, and you make an arrest, send it off for an OWI or under the influence, how many of those were related strictly to kratom?
Again, that is something that you've got to get from the lab. They're going to have the compilation of all of the tests that are done around the state. They'll be able to provide that information to you, whether it's unadulterated or when it's with other things. The thing to remember, though, with some of these drugs is there's a duration of effects. And sometimes when you take a drug, that duration of effects is going to last a while. And then, from what I'm understanding, is they'll be using kratom to enhance those effects longer than what the original duration of effects were. So you might still have that poly drug use, but when we're getting to them, the enhancement is because of the kratom. It's still going to show up in their blood that both of them are there, but at the end of the day, you're likely still you're gonna have both of them, but that kratom certainly has that ability to impair as well, and that's what we're hearing. I believe that's what other individuals at our trainings are telling us, is that they're using it to enhance those effects beyond what the original effect was.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just recall, there you go, that when that lab tested or testified a couple of last session, that they did in fact check for kratom. And the issue was that anytime kratom was present, that it was present with the addition of another drug.
That was my recollection as well.
Yeah.
It's not one single case, but I don't want to assume that.
And that's 2 years ago, so.
Because the testimony last time was, during the hearing was one thing, and I talked to the lab afterwards, and one person told me yes, but I'd like to hear from other people that yes, they always test for kratom, not just when it's suspected. And I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't either.
Thank you.
Representative Cabrera.
Yeah, I just had one question for clarification purposes, because you sort of emphasized multiple times now that we should follow up with the crime lab for additional information. Are you saying that just because of your own experience in forwarding information to them, that you believe there'll be some information that's valuable to us there, specific to kratom, or are you just saying in general, any sort of drug they'll know information about, so just ask about this specific one?
Two things. I know that those individuals, that the supervisors that are dealing with us every day, have really good information that they can provide to you. I know that because I've talked to them. Second thing is, every single one, every OWI, every overdose, when they draw blood, they send them to the crime lab or the hygiene lab to be tested. They're going to have the information on what the substances are. They're the experts.
Well, I would
for it.
imagine it's a crime lab. Of course, they're going to be testing
There's
for
both-
different
there's both of
substances. But the reason why I was asking you is because this is specific about. Yeah, I'm only asking because obviously we're talking about Kratom today, and so I'm just kind of wondering if you were saying that specifically because you are aware from your own experience in Dodge or your jurisdictions that you have been having a lot of issues with Kratom, and you know that information has been forwarded to the crime lab, and so we would gather in, obviously a crime lab is going to have information about whatever data, and substances that are being forwarded to them. But I want to know specifically about Kratom, and if you're referring us to that because you have specific knowledge and personal experience that you know for a fact from your area specifically at least, you've been having stuff forwarded to them, and just from that information, I don't know that I just want to say, search all of your entire database for every incident that there were, you know what I mean? That's why I'm just asking, are you saying that because you're sort of know from your own jurisdictions that you've already been forwarding stuff that was related to Kratom, or is this just in general that you're just saying they're the crime lab, they would have that data?
I know that because I represent all 72 sheriffs in the state, and we've been talking about this. And I know that all 72 sheriffs in the state and the police departments within them have been struggling with this issue across the state.
Good to
And so
know.
that I know that that is a central repository of information where you can go to get information. And I also know that they have experts there that can explain that information to you.
Yeah, I just want to know specifically about this. So I don't want to just ask them, go through all your data and see what happens. So, thank you.
Sure.
Representative Hong.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sergeant and Sheriff, for being here today and for your testimony. Sheriff, you mentioned that you yourself have not heard from a single citizen that you've interacted with asking for this legislation. And I know now that you represent 72 counties and 72 sheriff's departments. Have you heard from, those departments or within your own team from anywhere else, anyone who is asking for this?
I have not heard anybody ask for it outside of the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for law enforcement? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Next up, Kirk Bramble. Somebody coming up with you?
My name is James Carroll, and I did.
Come on up, James.
Excuse me, but are we going to be able to speak as the public? Thank you. I know, but the 4 o'clock thing scared me a little bit.
Oh, no, actually, I should clarify. We're gonna go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kurt Bramble. I'm the sponsor, or was a sponsor in 2019 in the state of Utah of the first Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And answer Representative Baldwin's question that he hasn't asked yet, I have no financial interest in the Kratom industry, okay? What I do have is I'm father of 6, been married 46 years. Our middle daughter, we have 3 boys, 3 girls. She and her high school sweetheart, both gifted athletes, they were injured when they were in high school, prescription pain medications, typical story, they go to college, they got married, prescription pain medication led to prescription abuse, led to drug use, led to heroin, led to jail. My son-in-law died of an opioid overdose, and had I known about Kratom at the time, the outcome may have been a bit different, given all of the testimony, all of the science. When I was first approached by the American Kratom Association, and I readily recognize it was AKA that asked me to run legislation in Utah in 2018. I rejected it. I got online, I looked, found all of the information that's been cited here in the committee today, from the FDA, the CDC, the Mayo Clinic, etc. But then I did a deep dive, and I found that there was a great deal more information. The National Institute of Drug Abuse, you heard from one of their key scientists earlier today, Dr. Jack Henningfield. They are charged with the investigation, and they're really the scientific arm that the DEA relies on for whether something should be prohibited, whether it should be scheduled. The DEA rejected it. NIDA has made it clear that the vast majority, well, I can read directly from their website. They say, relative to Kratom, and I'll quote, "Compared to deaths from other drugs, a very small number of deaths have been linked to Kratom products, and nearly all cases involved other drugs or contaminants." What we found is, in virtually every case, and this has played out across the country and around the world. I've had occasion to go to Indonesia several times. I've met with the Indonesian government. I've met with folks, scientists and professionals, literally throughout the world on Kratom, in virtually every case where there's an adverse outcome. And this played out here. You heard some testimony. Representative Brooks, I believe my recollection of the committee hearing 2 years ago from your state toxicology lab, or whatever the technical name is, said that every case of an OWI where Kratom was present, there was other substances in their test that they didn't find one OWI where Kratom was a sole antagonist. And that has played out time and time and time again. The only cases where Kratom is viewed as the sole substance have been anecdotal. As a policymaker, I've been searching, looking for the cases where we have evidence, empirical, quantifiable evidence, where Kratom was a sole substance and what the cause of death was. The problem with Kratom is that and this has played out in Utah, Kratom is easily adulterated. You heard from a witness that Kratom causes intoxication. Well, you heard from Dr. Jack Henningfield that Kratom does not create the mental impairment. There is no evidence of respiratory depression. There certainly is no euphoric high from taking Kratom. But the problem is, for bad actors in the marketplace, they will lace Kratom with fentanyl, benzodiazepine. The 9-decet we referred to, that's what started the FDA down there, saying that Kratom is a dangerous opioid. It was a product that was laced with O-desmethyltramadol, synthetic tramadol, all bought from the same online vendor. The product was called Krypton. But in every case that's been, that we've found, it's been adulterated Kratom. So it made sense to say that Kratom ought to be subject to the same type of regulation that even a bottle of water. If I go to a convenience store here in Wisconsin, I buy a bottle of water, that bottle of water is required to be labeled, it's required to have ingredients, it's required to have a batch number. Kratom was completely unregulated, and so what we did, we said that it ought to be registered with the state, there ought to be a certificate of analysis, it should be sold only behind the counter, and it should be properly labeled with appropriate warnings. So, Mr. Chair, I'd encourage you to give careful consideration. The opportunity to have Kratom available, NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the one agency that DEA looks to say what should be scheduled, what should not be, they will tell you, the scientists and their official position is that Kratom should not be scheduled. It should be available because the potential benefit to the public versus the detriment if Kratom is prohibited is substantial. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is James Carroll. You should be somewhat afraid. I am an attorney. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm here to help. For 3 years, I served as the director of an agency inside the White House called the Office of National Drug Control Policy. It's a position known informally as the U.S. Drug Czar. And in that capacity, I oversaw the $36 billion the federal government spends on drug issues. So that includes overseeing the entire DEA, all of our Customs and Border Protection agents that are involved in stopping the illicit flow of drugs into our country, as well as HHS for the treatment side, Department of Education for prevention, a total of 17 departments and agencies within the federal government. In that role, I was fortunate to be unanimously confirmed because it is considered to be, should be a nonpartisan position. I started my career as a criminal prosecutor, as a drug prosecutor in Virginia, and you can find no one harder on crime than me. I'm also the father of a daughter who is in recovery from an addiction to opioids. And there was mention earlier about the Sackler family and how the Sacklers hid the information. I can tell you for a fact the FDA, and you can read this in pretty much any of the articles, any of the books that have been written about this, the FDA licensed opioids knowing the addictive quality of it. So the fact that the FDA got it wrong, quite frankly, is nothing new. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience as well as the probably 1 million people that have died in the past 15 years from opioid addictions that started with a prescription. In Wisconsin, in the last 3 years since I left office, opioid overdoses or drug overdoses, fatal overdoses, have increased 50%. But I'm here to talk not just as a lawyer, I'm actually here as a fact witness. I'm not a scientist, I don't pretend to be one. And as a lawyer, I'm essentially paid by the hour, so we can go all night. Would be more than happy to talk about this. I'm here as a fact witness because I was the U.S. drug czar when the FDA came to me to request scheduling of Kratom. And I want to sort of explain some of the background that I was given at that point. At that point, I was not very familiar with Kratom. I had heard of it. I'd seen the neon signs at a vaping store, and that was pretty much the extent of which I knew about it. The FDA came and said, much of what you heard, much of what you read today on Google, is that it is fatal and it's causes respiratory distress and is able to decrease your ability to breathe. They gave a pretty compelling argument. And shortly after that, and I was fortunate, we had a very good working relationship at the point with the DEA, with the DEA administrator, and the Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Brett Jawah, who was mentioned earlier. Brett was, as the Assistant Secretary for Health, was the Chief Medical Officer inside HHS. He set the policy. U.S. Surgeon General reports, and the entire Public Health Corps reports to the Assistant Secretary for Health. Shortly after the FDA left, I knew they were headed over to meet with the DEA administrator. The Assistant Secretary for Health called me and said, "Jim, did the FDA brief you on Kratom?" And I said, "Yeah, they left here yesterday. I know today they're heading over to meet with Udom Dillon, the DEA administrator." And he said, "You need to stop before Udom Dillon, the DEA administrator, signs the ban." We were able to track Udom down at the airport, and Brett Jawah jumped in a car at HHS, went to the airport, pulled Udom into a conference room, and the discussion was the FDA got it wrong, and they didn't reveal the entire information. And as you've heard, Brett Jawah rescinded the FDA order because they were failing to tell the entire story. Again, I was there. I'm not the scientist. I'm just telling you what happened and what led to this. Since that time, and of course they rescinded it, we heard the information that in fact Kratom has been shown to help people with opioid addiction. And this isn't just during my time. Even the current Secretary of Health for President Biden recently said that FDA needs to, the claims of addiction liability or fatalities caused by Kratom are in fact caused by polydrug use or adulterated Kratom products. Again, no bigger supporter of law enforcement. Directly out of my office, I funded $300 million to federal, state, local drug task forces across every state and across every jurisdiction of the United States. But what they're seeing on the street, I don't discount, but what we're actually seeing scientifically is the use of adulterated products. What I can tell you is that for whatever reason, and I think there's a lot of theories, the FDA has it wrong. We know the science has shown us that. And we know from Dr. Nora Volkoff at NIDA, who's been recognized as most powerful 50 women in the U.S. because of her work across 4 presidents in leading NIDA, that this shows amazing potential to help people like my daughter get off opioids. And so for that, I wanted to come and express the facts of what happened. I was there during that time, and I wish you all luck. So with that, I think we're both happy to take any questions or go on for a couple of days if you would like.
Thank you both. Any questions for James or Kurt? Representative Onstead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for your testimony. I remember 20 or 25 years ago reading the Wall Street Journal and reading a really small little article. I remember I think it was like 2 paragraphs. And it was like a big mystery because somebody had died in Appalachia, a coal miner, who had been hurt in an industrial accident. And he died of a heroin overdose, and of course that was after he couldn't get his opioids anymore. And then there was like another little paragraph right after it where a worker in the woods in Maine had also been hurt in an industrial accident and died of a similar overdose. And now, 25 years later, Of course, we all know, where that has led. So it seems to me that, just the opportunity, the possibility that it's not just Suboxone, that there are things that we know can help people with their addiction to opioids. It seems to me, it leads me back to my decision after the last public hearing, that once again, I'll be voting for this bill, and that's the reason why.
Any other questions for Kurt or James? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Chair, one thing I neglected to point out in my testimony, if I may, very quickly. As a senator, I work I'm an honorary colonel with our Highway Patrol. Matter of fact, in my 24 years in the Senate, I've been probably one of the most consistent supporters of law enforcement. We went to our law enforcement, our public safety, and we've followed up with our the head of the Highway Patrol is called the superintendent of the Highway Patrol, head of public safety is called the commissioner, and the president of our Sheriff's Association happens to be the sheriff in my own county. And after we passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in 2019, I was genuinely interested in what has been the experience in the state of Utah, both with our Department of Agriculture in terms of administering and enforcing the KCPA, and what's been the experience with law enforcement. Surprisingly, our sheriff, when I asked him, he said, look, we understand that some law enforcement, we understand why they have concerns about Kratom, and it has to do with how Kratom is closely related to the drug culture. And that's because not only is Kratom used for people trying to get off drug addiction, but it's also because, and quite often the cases are, the drug is spiked, it's adulterated with Kratom. But in all cases with the Utah law enforcement, they have been very supportive of the bill, and they've been very supportive of the ability to get the adulterated products off the market. The FDA is not doing what they should be doing. It's left to the states, and this is a case across the board quite often. If the FDA would be doing their work then and looking at the science, we wouldn't be here today. But because they haven't, it's up to the states. 11 states have followed what we started in Utah. 30 states are looking at doing it now. But I wanted to emphasize that we've been working with law enforcement in our state, and we have not seen the problem, and your toxicology lab supported that, saying there wasn't one case where Kratom was the sole issue with an OWI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next up, we'll have Jay Wentworth from Eagle River. And I would ask everybody from moving forward here that we keep our testimony hopefully not repetitive, and I understand everybody's got a passion here, but I'd like to limit it to 5 minutes each. So.
Where am I sitting for this? Right here?
Right here, Jay. Right in front of us.
I'm Jay Wentworth from Eagle River, Wisconsin, Vilas County, respectively, and the Tri-County area of Oneida and Forest counties. My wife and I are owners and operators of a recovery community organization called Empowered Affiliates. At that facility, we help people that are with addiction. I'm in recovery myself. It's been about 13 years for me this time around, and yes, I have tried Kratom. I tried Kratom for 4 days last week. Right now, I'm pretty much totally abstinent from anything other than eye drops for my glaucoma. And when I talked to Mr. Shinholzer, who also helped us create a jail program up in Vilas County, and in fact, it's the only jail program, fully blown, men's and women's pod in the state of Wisconsin, full blown. We got MRT, moral reckonant therapy, some other people that come in that are in recovery, and they're professionals. They come in. We have programs for in-house programs for the jail. I haven't heard a lot about Kratom. In fact, Mr. Shinholzer called me a couple weeks back and said, "What do you know about this?" I know some people that have said it, and they wondered if it was phony weed or what's this other stuff, and they've seen it at the convenience stores and everything. We lived right south of the UP, so we've got, it's legal up there as well as marijuana. I just have to ask this. I don't know anybody that's overdosed on Kratom. I know people that have tried it, myself included. I am a full-blown certified addict of opiates, heroin specifically, and alcohol. I had no problem taking this under, as directed. and stopping using it, it helps me keep focused. I felt no withdrawal. And the people that I know that have tried it in the last month, same thing. They could take it or leave it. And we're full-blown addicts. You know, we're still up in the northwoods of Wisconsin wondering, gosh, we're full-blown addicts. Everybody's got a problem with kratom coming in, marijuana, it's coming. You know, unfortunately, it's part of the entertainment industry too, and people are making money at it. I get that. We live in a free enterprise country. I also don't understand why we have legalized marijuana when it's legal in all the states. Wrong. I'm not saying we join up and we start saying, okay, well, let's just give in. Let's just legalize drugs. Maybe that is coming in the future. But for right now, we're talking about kratom. I don't know anybody that's died of kratom. I didn't appreciate the story that those officers told with the yellow crap coming on it. That sounds like a bunch of more embellishments than I care to listen to, for real. Today, I sit here and say, well, you know, it's helping some people. For me, not so much, but hey, what's this overdose thing? I'm a full-blown addict. I felt, you know, maybe a little of the euphoria from, the Dilaudid days and heroin days, but you get up there, I see how this is helping people. Now I'm talking to more and more people just because I opened the door and started asking. I'm not going to listen to the internet, I never do. But what I will listen to is people's testimonies. And when I live in a state where they don't like drinking and driving, yet we sell liquor at every convenience store in the world, that's not the way to go either. No neon signs on this one. The reefer's got that edge, right? I think medicinally, why don't we try this? Why don't we give it a shot? I say if it needs some approval from somebody, they should just go ahead and do it. Because it's all hands on deck. We're dying here. We have a huge problem in Wisconsin, as well as the rest of the country. I don't see why we just don't get together, lay down some myths and stigma on both sides, and say, why don't we try this? Why don't we try doing this the right way? And I'm all for that. That's all I got.
Any questions for Jay?
Thanks for coming to me, Jay.
You're welcome.
You bet.
I voted for you.
Boy, there's a lot. Isla Webster from Grafton. Yes. Who's with you? Oh, come on up, Heidi. Take your time. Whenever you get comfortable, you have the floor.
We're trying.
That's fine.
Do you want me to go first? Yes. Okay. Is this on?
It is on.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Representative Swearingen and members of the committee. As you are aware, I am Isla Webster and I live in Grafton, Wisconsin. I am here in support of Kratom Bill AB393. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you about my experience with Kratom. I have been living with pain for many of my 90 years. I have bilateral lipedema in my lower body, which developed in high school and is very painful. I am prone to epicondylitis in both elbows and bursitis in my shoulders. I have a stress fracture at C5 in my spine and a bulging disc at L5. I have a Baker cyst behind my left knee. I am prone to costochondritis. I have been diagnosed with severe diverticulosis, which periodically has led to diverticulitis. It doubles you up with pain. I cannot take anti-inflammatories due to GI bleeding from Motrin years back, so I am limited to Tylenol or Kratom. I hope you will not dismiss this as, well, she's 90, so what do you expect? I am the youngest of 10 children. My older siblings lived well into their 80s, 90s, and 100s. My only living sister is now 93. So genetics predict that I could live to be 100, and I am doing everything I can to make that happen. When I am in Illinois and I can take Kratom, I function like a person 20 years younger and walk my 5,000 steps throughout the day and do my exercise program with no problem. When it's back to Wisconsin, I still do my 5,000 steps, but it takes longer and with a great deal of pain in my legs. I have been taking Kratom in Illinois for a few years now with absolutely no side effects. My blood work is perfect, as well as my heart. As the saying goes, God helps those who help themselves. Well, sometimes he might want a little help from some friends. So I am asking you, be a friend and pass AB393. Thank you.
You want me to go? Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Swearingen and members of the committee. My name is Heidi Sikora. My residence is in Grafton, Wisconsin, and I'm here in support of AB 393. And thank you for allowing me to share my testimony. Well, here I am again after another year of schlepping myself and my mother back and forth from Wisconsin to Illinois. In the past year, Kratom helped me improve my strength and endurance. It helped me recover to the point I only needed it occasionally, until last Tuesday, when I had an acute exacerbation leading to inflammation of my entire rib cage. If you've ever had broken ribs, you understand the kind of pain that I'm having. Well, thank God for the natural, perfect Kratom plant, and thank God it happened in Illinois, where I could get Kratom. Kratom didn't take all the pain away, but it was the most effective in reducing my pain level to at least let me get out of bed. I didn't plan on an extended stay in Illinois, and neither did my mother. But if I went back to Wisconsin, the only pain relief option would be an opioid. At that level of pain, Tylenol and ibuprofen aren't enough to reduce the pain to get out of bed or get to the bathroom independently. Anyone who is opposed to passing this Kratom legislation is telling me that they think a better option is for me to take opioids. Why? Because the medical society says so? Or because a drug manufacturer has more influence than the best interests of the people of Wisconsin? These are the ones that brought us the opioid crisis, leading to thousands of deaths. You're telling me you think opioids are a safer option than the natural Kratom plant? There is absolutely no evidence to support that. Kratom is a better, safer option, and I challenge anyone to prove otherwise. Please pass Bill AB 393 to prevent more opioid deaths and give Wisconsinites a safer, natural alternative for pain relief. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate you taking the time to come to the Capitol. Any questions for Isla or Heidi from the committee? Representative Moses.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thanks for coming down and testifying. And without obviously disclosing a bunch of private medical information in HIPAA, I'm curious what other alternatives you guys tried as far as treatment for some of the chronic pain. And I mean, you went through a list of kind of conditions you had and stuff. What else did you try before you tried Kratom, and how do you discover Kratom? I mean, how did you come about it? Whichever one wants.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually, my medical history is pretty complex. I have multiple rare disorders, and I'm pretty drug sensitive. So certainly Tylenol, ibuprofen, Aleve, naproxen, you know, all pretty much everything you can think of, I have tried. Because I have chronic pain, there's a big difference between acute treatment of pain and chronic pain. And you cannot take those things long-term. So, for example, Tylenol. The number one reason for liver failure in the United States is because of overdose on acetaminophen or Tylenol. So that's not an option for me with chronic pain. I can't take it all the time and it makes me so tired. Any kind of NSAID or ibuprofen leads to, stomach problems. And so I can't take that long term. So I basically had to stop everything. And then as far as finding Kratom, that's something that one of my sons actually found that was helping him. He actually is an alcoholic, and he was able to find Kratom to be able to get off alcohol, and was very helpful for him. And he said it also helped with pain, so maybe I should try it, which I did.
Quick follow-up, and without incriminating yourself, I'm kind of curious where you get access to it in the state, being a
Illinois.
Wisconsin resident, and what's the cost roughly for a consumer?
It's very inexpensive, so a month's supply for me is about $12. But I only take it in Illinois. And so that's been very difficult. And there's, as my mother said, there's a big difference between the level of pain control in Illinois versus in Wisconsin. Now, to me, the most important thing is taking something that is going to improve my health and improve my function. I don't take things, I've never taken any kind of drugs to get high or for that kind of effect. And Kratom allows me to exercise and stretch to increase my strength. And that's just been an incredible, incredible benefit. So when I come back to Wisconsin, that is difficult. If I have an injury in Wisconsin, I really have to get back to Illinois as quickly as I can to try and recover. Otherwise, the recovery period is very extended.
Well, I don't think I hear get back to Illinois to recover very often, so thank you for coming in.
Any other questions from the committee for Isla or Heidi? Seeing none, thank you very much, ladies. Next up, Jennifer Zukowski. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi,
From Fredonia.
Fredonia. I'm actually.
Welcome to the state capitol.
Thank you so much. I'm actually neighbors to the Grafton residents.
Oh, okay.
I have to preface this by saying I'm nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous.
So my voice might be a little bit shaky, but I'm very passionate too about what I'm saying. So first off, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, all of you today. My name is Jennifer Zukowski, and I'm speaking out from a journalist's point of view. It was in 2016 that I happened upon a Reddit post that would change my life. It was about the threatened national ban on Kratom, an herb I never heard of. I decided to write an article, and long story short, the first got over 1 million views. The second story I wrote got over 2.5 million views. I could not believe the passion within these people who strongly who strongly banded together. Surely this must have meant something. I came up with the hashtag #IamKratom, and in between so much research, I got to know so many stories, people from all walks of life, from veterans to blue-collar workers to doctors and attorneys. And Kratom literally turned their lives around, just as it has for millions of others. The passion of the advocacy encouraged me to switch careers. Sorry.
You're okay.
Thank you. Okay, I probably should have had it not on my phone. Okay, so, yes, it encouraged me to switch careers completely. The people are speaking just as they did in 2016. It is with great empathy that I encourage all who have a voice to help those who want to be helped naturally and safely to make Kratom available to all through the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which will also eliminate any bad actors. In addition, I invite you to look at one of many of my articles titled Wayne Forrest, American Indonesian Chamber of Commerce President, offers insight on Kratom and more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Jennifer? Representative Brooks.
So Jennifer, thanks for coming down. Jennifer's actually from my district, and we met a few months ago on a totally separate topic. But one of the things we found out in common is that there was an incident at one of my establishments where somebody had overdosed. So I know you have a great deal of experience in this. Your experience with Kratom, and I know you through our conversation, you were a distributor at one time or trying to set that up. Have you had any experiences negatively, or your customers, clients,
Absolutely
with the use of
not.
Kratom?
No. And I should have also said, so my last surgery, I had many, many surgeries done over the years. And physically, I did get addicted to opiates. I hated taking them. I got mean on them. I didn't like how they made me feel at all. And I wanted nothing to do with them, but it was the only thing that could help me. It's the only thing the doctors would give me. My last surgery was at Mayo Clinic. It was 8.5 hours long. And since I was in Rochester, Minnesota, I had access to Kratom. My husband and I stayed overnight, actually about 3 nights, and by the second day, I had switched to Kratom and needed no more opiates, which was incredible because it was for years that I had to, endure these surgeries and have to, go through those horrible, horrific withdrawals. There's a really great documentary right now on Netflix called Painkiller, and it outlines so well how wrong this opiate crisis is and how it became, and to single out an herb that in itself I don't believe has killed anyone. And if it did kill that one person we're talking about, what about Tylenol? How many people have that killed? As some others said, you can get addicted to anything. You can be addicted to water, for heaven's sake. My uncle, he actually drank so much water one day that my aunt thought he was having a stroke. He actually overdosed and he almost passed away. His organs started failing. You can get addicted to anything. I never, ever felt addicted in the times that I had taken Kratom.
So, and I know you've shared with me prior to the hearing, and I appreciate you sharing it, if I even got to pull it out of you a little bit.
Yes.
But because of your medical issues, just like the people that testified prior, you tried all the normal over-the-counter stuff. You had issues, I'll let it go at that, with opiates and other painkillers, and this has really been the only thing that's helped, correct?
Correct. And I also have major ADHD, and so when I have been able to take it, when I've been in legal states, which I often am, it increases my focus tenfold. I also have something called essential tremor. You might be able to see that right now. I'm a little shaky. And when I'm nervous, it's tenfold. And that's another thing that Kratom really, really helps me with. And that's on both sides of my family. I would love for them to be able to benefit from it too. My cousin, it's so sad, all day she's a bobblehead, literally, all day long, every day. Thankfully, I am not nearly as bad as her or some other family members, but to take this herb that there's been so many studies, I urge you to reach out to Marilyn Hustis. I did an interview with her that didn't end up getting published for reasons I would not like to get into, but she did some phenomenal studies showing that no, this is not a threat like some are making it out to be. The threat is with the opiates and all these other drugs. I looked through almost every autopsy as a journalist. I still have them on my computer. In almost every instance, in every instance, that I had, there was methamphetamine, there was fentanyl, there was all of these horrible, horrific drugs involved, and then they blame Kratom. Why? Why are you blaming Kratom when they had all these other things in their systems? That's incredible to me. And I also spoke with Scott Gottlieb from the DEA in 2016. He acted like he was on my side. Then he turned around and said, to the public, he voted completely against it. He threatened the ban, the national ban, only to find out he serves on the board for Pfizer. A Huffington Post reporter got in touch with me, and he is the one who actually figured that out. Nobody knew. Conflict of interest much? You tell me.
Any other questions for Jennifer? Seeing none, Jennifer, thanks very much for waiting.
Thank you.
Next up is Misty Friedel. Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. No, I do have some PTSD. It's a little like a courtroom. So I've spent 13 years in the criminal justice system, and I am free today because of Kratom. I started out, if you can understand my country accent, let me just slow down. Okay, I will be spending time in Prairie du Chien and McGregor, and I'm living in Illinois and Chicago back and forth. And we have property in Florida, and we're going to start like some greenhouses and grow plants and try to create some jobs for women who are transitioning from jails, institutions, and prisons. And I have a small nonprofit startup called Recoveryscape, and I want to change the landscape of recovery because I've been there and I've done that. I spent, 3 years incarcerated. So I've tried everything there is to try when it comes to addiction. I found myself in active addiction after 12 years in pain management. And it was the Cleveland Clinic, too, a division of Cleveland Clinic in Warrensville Heights, Ohio. So I had a legitimate doctor, not a pill pusher. I passed all my drug tests, showed up every month, and we were small business owners. My husband was in the coal industry in West Virginia. He mined coal, and we had a little convenience store, bought Subway franchises, started a small organic health food store in the 90s before it was trendy. And I started noticing I had chronic muscle pain that wouldn't go away. I tried I tried it all. Name that, I've done that. So I spent 12 years on a plethora of pharmaceuticals, and tore my life apart, the pharmaceuticals, the side effects. The more I took OxyContin, every 2 hours I would notice this like panicky feeling. It wouldn't last 4 to 6 hours like the prescription said on the bottle. And I had a convenience store to run. I was homeschooling 3 children, had the health food store, a little restaurant, so I was really just busy. And my marriage fell apart. I think that we underestimate what happens to the psyche and consciousness when people take these pharmaceuticals. Like, we're not addressing anything for real in life. It's just like this false sense of well-being. So I lost touch with my family, my children, my husband. Ended up selling things and moving 3 hours away to be close to my mother. And I started a cleaning company, at which time the divorce got pretty intense, and I owed the pain clinic money. Long story short, I found myself self-medicating because I couldn't find anywhere to go to get help, and I was in withdrawal with 3 children. The pain clinic said I owed $1,300. Anyway, I went to the ER, and they had no solution for me. in withdrawal. So in desperation and asking around, I went to a methadone clinic as a chronic pain patient. Never had any addiction issues. At the methadone clinic, I told them what had happened, and they said, well, we don't treat chronic pain. Well, all I knew is my life was, it was like a 911 situation. I'd gone to the ER, they couldn't help me. I'd spent over a decade on high doses of OxyContin, 120 milligrams a day, plus breakthrough medicine in between fentanyl Duragesic patches because you build a tolerance to these medications. So on the way out the door at the methadone clinic, I met someone. And like I said, I'd moved 2 hours away. So call it fate, call it what you will. This is my lot in life. I ran into a girl who said, I can help you find something, because I was like in withdrawal. And I had never experienced withdrawal. I didn't even know what a misdemeanor was. I didn't know what a felony was. This was like, here I am. And here's this human standing before me, says, I can help you. And she happened to be from West Virginia, and I was in North Carolina at the time, so I felt this automatic, like, hi, how are you? How can you help me? So she took me, and we found something to get rid of the withdrawal, some methadone pills. It didn't take long. With the divorce, it's just the perfect recipe for disaster. I found myself in active heroin addiction, incarcerated. I had charges in 9 counties in 2 states. So, go hard or go home, I did it. And I hit rock bottom of the rock bottom. I lost friends. I lost my best friend to addiction, and I lost the girl who introduced me to heroin. She overdosed in my bathroom, dead. My children across the hall. I've seen some horrible things in addiction, and I've done some horrible things in addiction. And this plant works. So when we think about what is God? What is God? Nature is God. And people are reaching out for God, for nature, to find answers that we haven't found in these pharmaceuticals, which are all just trying to mirror nature. You know, so I'm so nervous. I don't even know. I just wanted to share my story and tell you that I've been clean 8 years from heroin. And I take less Kratom now after 6 years of daily use than I did in the beginning. I did take high doses of Kratom in the beginning because I was in withdrawal, and high doses is what it took. And I think I have seen thousands of women be able to source these plants themselves and fix their lives in their houses. And that's the problem. We don't need government, you know, and we don't need pharmaceuticals to come and rescue everybody. Let's just see if we can, as adults, take the risk that all these pharmaceuticals bring. If I can make that choice as a human, as an adult, then I should be able to make that choice as a human, as an adult, to risk my life with nature. And I understand that there are risks associated, and I think that's what this legislation can do. Bring some accountability, some testing, and with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Hang on a minute, one question.
I'm sorry, y'all, I'm sorry.
Representative Gustafson.
Just got one question for you.
Yes.
I see a tattoo on your right arm. Can you tell us about that?
That is the Kratom molecule, because that was what I would call the sweet spot. I was an IV heroin user. So, yep.
Thanks for coming, Missy.
All right, thank you.
Next up, James Small. From Oconomowoc. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Thank you for having me today. I know it's been a long hearing and everybody's getting restless. So I'm not going to read through my prepared testimony. I'll turn that in down there.
Okay.
I'm here on behalf of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is a nonprofit group of, well, I'll read that off of here so you can better understand what I'm doing. It's a nonprofit group of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals who speak from firsthand experience. Our mission to make communities safer by focusing law enforcement resources on the greatest threats to public safety, promoting alternatives to arrest and incarcerations, addressing the root causes of crime, and working towards healing police-community relations. So I've spent 25 years of my life as a law enforcement officer here in Wisconsin, 10 of those as a chief of police for municipalities. I worked for 2 different municipalities. And in those 10 years, served on 2 different drug task force oversight committees. Now, I tell you all that because when I was first became aware of the legislation 2 years ago, that was the first time I ever heard of this. All these years doing drug enforcement, overseeing drug task forces, it just wasn't an issue. When I was approached about coming and speaking on behalf of this for LEAP, again, I reached out to some of I just retired June 30th from law enforcement, and reached out to some of my connections, drug recognition experts and so on, and they're all like, yeah, we got taught about it, but it's not here. We aren't seeing issues with it. I found one officer who's ever seen it one time while they were doing a drug search warrant. So our interest in it from LEAP is more from the harm reduction side. And that's something I've put a lot of time in my career over, because some of the unspeakable things that I've seen in addiction with people, I'm not gonna start going through here today. We could be here all night talking about all their personal tragedies. But giving another pathway for people to take that choice to get off of the opiate addiction, because there's lots of them it just doesn't work for. You know, you need to have health insurance to go to the clinic to get that treatment. We know we have an issue with that. We know we have issues to access. One more pathway, and I don't see harm in it. That's why I'm here today, because I haven't seen Kratom be an issue. I think it can be regulated, it can be safe. And where I've heard of there being issues, it's when it's adulterated and so on. We've heard a lot of testimony about that today. But, you know, giving adults that freedom to go and make that choice, I think, is important, so that they can get themselves into a better place. Because I don't know what works in the opiate crisis that we've had. I came into law enforcement in 1998, right on the front end of when it started, and here we are 25 years later, and we don't know. And it's as bad today or worse than it was even a few years ago. So that's why I'm here today. I'm going to submit a written document to your Sergeant at Arms. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Any questions for James? Seeing none, James, thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next up, Michael Abram, and I assume April Abram? You guys put a long shift in here today, too. Welcome.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I'll try and keep this really short. Just so everybody knows, I do own and operate a Kratom business, have been since 2016. A little bit of my backstory: I was in a motorbike accident when I was 15. Woke up in the hospital after, I don't even remember how long. I was in a coma for a little bit, and woke up, first time ever, had an IV pumping morphine into my system. And it was basically since that point, I was an addict. When I became an adult, when I turned 18, I got into everything under the sun. Prescription and non. Heroin, cocaine, acid, ecstasy, anything. Because, yeah, I was pumped full of morphine, Vicodin, Dilaudid, since 15 years old. Fast forward, I'm working as an operating engineer in Illinois for Local 150. I hurt my back while I was working out, and my trainer says to me, hey, whatever, it's all good. You can just go to the doctor and they'll write a script. This is back in 2015, 2016. And I said, absolutely not. I would rather live with the pain At that point in time, I had been clean for 5 years. I just celebrated 13 years being clean last month. I said, absolutely not, I will not be. I would rather die than tempt fate again. That almost killed me multiple times, never gonna happen. He tells me, well, have you ever heard of Kratom? I said, no, I haven't. But I'm willing to try anything as long as it's natural. He says, yeah, absolutely. I try it. And me as an operator, it's like, I need to be cognizant. I need to be aware. I'm hauling and operating heavy machinery. So I try it that night. And it was insane. I was like, the pain is gone, but my mind is still here, which is unlike any other drug I've ever been on in my life. Fast forward a couple years, taking this product, learning more about it, eventually starting the company and working, you know, my day job and this job at the same time, because I have a passion for people like myself, like a lot of the people that we've seen here today that are addicted and have things shoved down their throat that are FDA approved. And I hate it when people come up to me and they're like, hey, is this FDA approved? And I say, no, thank God. Because guess what? Most of the stuff that's killing people today is FDA approved. And I'm sorry, like politically speaking, maybe this will ruffle some feathers. I think this is America. I think we should have the right to choose, and I'm all about regulating 100%. I'm 100%. I'm part of the CGMP program that the AKA does. We're a certified vendor because I do care about people, and I think that they should know what they're consuming, but that they are adults and should have the right to consume it.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, you know, over the years, it's just taken so much to try to understand what this plant even is. And this is what we hear constantly from everybody. What is Kratom? And we were recently in Illinois doing an event, had a booth set up, and that's the number one question that people ask. And that's also the number one problem that vendors have in promoting this product is marketing. Because not only does Big Pharma work with the FDA and try to quash any actually positive information about that, that's the first 20 pages or whatever it is, when you Google Kratom, what is Kratom, are gonna come up negative. So people, we know how people act. They look at the first couple links, right? When they pull something up, like, ugh, you know, what is this? But, you know, I do the marketing, and it's incredibly difficult because it's not just Big Pharma, it's Big Tech. There are a whole bunch of platforms that we just can't even talk about Kratom because we get shut down. We can't go on Google, we can't go on Facebook or Instagram or any of these like normal marketing platforms. And my problem with this is that severely limits our ability to inform people about what Kratom actually is so that they can make an informed choice and they can actually take responsibility and take it correctly, because there are a lot of misconceptions about it, because the people who don't care about people and will take this product on are places like, not all of them, but places like smoke shops, you know? They don't care about what this person is putting in their body, they care about the money. And, you know, us as a company, we always say we put people over product. If you come to us and, you know, you say that you feel like you're addicted to Kratom or you're too dependent and you'd like to not be on it, we totally support that. The problem is that Kratom is not the problem. The problem is up here, it's in here, because people are searching for things that a substance, Kratom or not, will never satisfy. We're looking for meaning in our life. We're looking for God. We're looking for love. And people go to all sorts of things, you know, not just substances, but all sorts of behaviors. And unfortunately, you know, people do take Kratom for the wrong reasons, but part of that has to do with lack of education, lack of information, or it just takes too much work, for people to actually find the correct information. So that's how we feel as a company, people over product, and, people need more help than just a plant. I totally support regulation and, the ability to choose what to put in your body. But, it's not Kratom's fault when people misuse it. So, thank you.
Well, thank you both for sticking around for the whole day. Any questions for Michael or April? Go ahead.
No, the AK isn't paying me.
All right. But my question is, you said you are restricted on Google search or things like that. Can you clarify what you mean?
You're saying that we're restricted? Yes.
How?
So, for example, if we wanted to advertise that we sell Kratom powder, we would try to create an ad on Google, for example, advertising white Kratom powder. And if Kratom is in the title, Google it'll let it run for maybe a day or two if they miss it, but then it will get shut down according to Google policy. And I think part of the problem with that, I'm all for taking care in the verbiage and not proclaiming that it's going to solve your problems and that kind of thing. Absolutely. But it takes it down from everything.
Is that because you are posting that ad in the state of Wisconsin, or just generally, even with
Just generally.
With
Yep.
the platform.
With the platform, so it's a Google platform problem. It's not just in Wisconsin. Because we would not advertise specifically to Wisconsin, since that would be in violation.
Right.
So-
But I would think if the product is legal in other states, Google wouldn't, or other online platforms wouldn't block people from advertising.
You would think that, but that is not the case. And that's part of the reason it's so hard to find quality information, because it's not just ads that are taken down, it's just information, so.
All right, thank you.
And that's also, if I might add, that's also the case with, especially back in the day, with payment platforms. So they were shutting down when we first started. We did this big pre-sale, sold all of our product, most of it, and 30 minutes before the sale ended, the sale was a 30-day sale, pre-sale. 30 minutes before the sale ended, PayPal shut us down and froze our assets. So we had to ship out all that product and not have any money for about a year. And that's not uncommon. I personally know many companies, many people that have had that sort of thing happen. So it's the big tech platforms, it's the banks, it's the payment processors. And the question, I think, should be asked, why is that? What is going on that all of these places just happen to know the same thing on Kratom?
Right, and what it leads to, unfortunately, is bad actors and some Kratom vendors, desperate to get sales because they do love this product, or they see that there is money in it, which there is. But then if they do the maneuvering, they talk about Kratom as something, well, it's herbal tea, and it just doesn't allow actual blunt information that would help the user decide for themselves with accurate information what to do.
Okay, any other questions for Michael or April? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here to testify on Assembly Bill 393? Maybe I missed? That will conclude the hearing on Assembly Bill 393. We can tell you that Senator Cabrera has registered in favor. Steve Schmitz has registered in favor. Scott Meyer has registered in favor. James Fenley has registered against, and Tim Hoven has registered against. For the committee, I expect a An executive session next week, probably Wednesday. We'll notice it as soon as we figure that out. Other than that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Eye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.